housekeeping announcements. First of all, it's important for everybody here to know that we're live streaming. So this is going out to the whole state, and so be careful. Say what you need to say. The other thing is, just in case, this is the Travel, Recreation, Wildlife Committee in Farmington at Eastern Wyoming College. And we have the Joint Travel Recreation Committee committee assembled. So anyway, with that, I would ask Brian Fuller to tell us what we need to know about these microphones.
Mr. Chairman, there we go. Mr. Chairman, just a couple of quick announcements. First, as you mentioned, it's important for everyone to speak into a microphone to make sure that that our voices are caught on the live stream as well as the audio recording that LSO does. For today, just to run through this afternoon's events, the committee's tour at Fort Laramie begins promptly at 1:30 p.m. And then the committee's tour at Camp, I believe it's going to be about an hour tour there. And then our tour at Camp Guernsey begins promptly at 3 p.m. for those who are attending that. One final note, Mr. Chairman, as the members may be aware of the committee, House Bill 192 from last session is enacted into law, and basically the upshot of the change in the recordings and confidentiality law is that conversations that are picked up on the recording or on the live broadcast are no longer deemed confidential under 28.8.116. In addition to that, either the live stream broadcast or the audio recording will be posted online now after every meeting.
Thank you. And I forgot to mention my name. I'm Chairman Allen, Jim Allen, on the House, and I'll be chairing today, and Senator Fred Emmerich will be chairing the meeting tomorrow. Vice Chairman, is that the same person?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm Sherry Steinmetz, the representative from House District 5 here in Goshen County. So I'd like to welcome you all here to Goshen County, and thank you for coming. We have some scones from our local bakery, the Bread Doctor, who is truly a doctor. He's an ER doctor here in Goshen County, and we're fortunate to have his little bakery open up to us. And then we have some great tours planned for you, and also our chamber has provided information in the back. So there's little bags and there's a little booklet when we pass the commemoration of the 150th treaty. There's a little booklet on that back there, so help yourself with that. Today we'll be heading out at noon and heading to Fort Laramie, where we'll meet at the gathering place. It's a little historic tea room there in Fort Laramie, and it was the site of the first school and the judge in that town, in our historic town of Fort Laramie. And then after that, we'll head to the guard camp. And then for anybody who's interested later on, there is a gubernatorial forum in Wheatland if you want to just pop over the hill. It's 15 minutes away, and all the governor candidates will be there tonight at 5 o'clock at the fairgrounds. So that's kind of what we have going on for today, and we welcome you, and we're glad you're here.
Representative Halverson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is really silly, but I've never seen this microphone before. Is it always on? Okay, so we don't have to press any buttons. Excellent, thank you.
All right. Ryan, would you call the roll, please? Jennifer.
Senator Anselmi Dalton.
Here.
Senator Garner.
Here.
Senator Boner.
Here.
Senator Moniz.
Here.
Representative Clem.
Here.
Representative Flitner. Here. Representative Freeman.
He's excused. Excuse me.
Representative Carew.
Here.
Representative Haley.
Representative
Here.
Representative Halverson.
Here.
Representative McGuire.
He's excused as well.
Representative Steinmetz.
here.
Co-Chairman Emmerich.
Here.
Co-Chairman Allen.
Here. Thank you. So I'd like to welcome all of you here for this meeting. So just another reminder, speak through the chairman, address the chairman, and then the representative or senator that you need to ask a question or speak to. I think you all know the drill. So let's see here. Approval of minutes. Is there a motion? Move to approve, seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay, then the minutes are approved. Okay, so we'll dive right in. Director Scott Talbott from the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, you're up. And the issue is hunting issues, specifically high-tech hunting preference points, game and fish general update, and then we'll move into the hunting outfitter board finding and licensing authority. So you're up.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Scott Talbott. I'm the director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. Today I have with me Deputy Director John Kennedy and also the Communications Director Rennie McKee, and we will go through the first agenda items, the high-tech hunting preference points, and then a general update. Before we get started, I would certainly like to extend a thanks to this committee and the legislature for several of the bills that passed last year, and for example, the 365-day license. We're looking forward to implementing that, and we think that would be a great service to our sportsmen. Certainly, I'd like to thank Representative Steinmetz for hosting a meeting in Torrington early in the year before it's 120 degrees in Torrington, Wyoming. So we have to agree that the Bread Factor was a great place to start off the day this morning. With that, Mr. Chairman, the first issue that the committee has requested is an overview of high-tech hunting. And as the committee recognizes from the last legislative session, there has been a lot of discussions over high-tech hunting in the very near past. This is an issue that the department has been working on for several decades, and I'd actually like to read a short introduction from a paper that Wyoming Game and Fish Department put together in 2008. It starts off, the list of high-tech hunting equipment available today is staggering. New products hit the market almost daily. All are designed to make it easier to get your game. They vary from simple items that have minimal or no impact to invention of unthinkable advancement. If we agree sports like hunting and fishing are quote, traditional by definition, then it would follow that there should be limits to protect that tradition. A good term to apply here is fair chase. At some point, harvest and success and the quest for it can lead us to cross the fair chase line. Allowing equipment that substitutes for skill and effort, we eventually end up needing to draw the line. Where do we need to draw that line? Let me remind you that in 2008, you could not buy a drone over the counter at almost any store or online. 1,000-yard shooting was practiced only by military professionals and a very, very small group of elite precision shooters. There are many tactics that bring us to question the issue of fair chase. Long-range weapons, including rifle and archery equipment, smart rifles, computer-aided hunting, air guns, air bows, long-range crossbows, the use of cameras, drones, GPS technology, real-time cameras, and other technologies develop rapidly in the marketplace. I do need to acknowledge this has not been a new issue and has been dealt with many times in the past. Some of those examples include firearms. About 6 years ago, I guess it's been about 8 years ago, the market was flooded with wildcat firearms. And many of those firearms under the old definition were very difficult to determine whether they were actually legal or not legal to hunt with. And in the last 10 years, the variety and the make of firearms that's available for people to hunt with has increased many, many fold over what was available for the hunter 30 years ago. At that time, the Wyoming legislature granted the commission the authority under Title 23, Chapter 3, Statute 110. The commission shall establish by rule and regulation firearm and ammunition specifications for taking of big game birds, or big game, trophy game animals, and game birds. And so at that time, the commission developed regulations to address that. In addition to that, in about 2000, the issue of artificial light, and at that time, there were a number of sighting devices, whether they be scopes for rifles or lighted reticles for bows, or whether they be illuminated battery-powered fishing lures, or lures that you can charge with light and then fish with. At that time, that technology was also very challenging to deal with under the statute. And basically, the statute at that time said that it was illegal to use any artificial light to aid in the taking of any wildlife in the state. At that time, the legislature passed a statute that said that the commission shall establish regulation, and there were several parameters that were put on there to use artificial light in lighting devices, and then also included a provision to make accommodations for persons with blindness, central visual acuity disabilities. And so the commission did that. I think we did that quite successfully. In addition to that, another issue that came up was baiting of big game, and the legislature also provided the authority to the commission to regulate the baiting of big game to address damage issues, human safety and disease, and population management. That has also been an issue that has been dealt with quite successfully. About a year ago, the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission asked the department to start looking at high-tech devices and make some recommendations to the commission. We asked a number of our people to look into that, and this past January, we actually presented a paper to the commission, and the commission looked at many of those issues. Probably the most notable issue was the issue of long range and very accurate crossbows. And the commission received a large amount of public input on the use of crossbows during the special archery season. And based on that testimony, one for youth, for disabled hunters, for elderly hunters that wanted to participate in the seasons, the commission has directed the department to survey the public to determine what the feelings of the public on many of those issues are. Currently, we're working with Wyoming, the University of Wyoming, to send out a survey on high-tech equipment and get the opinion of the public on those issues. And since the legislative session, when we talked about GPS coordinates and the sale of GPS coordinates, the collection of those with drones and those types of things, the department has met internally and extensively with our legal counsel, and there are two issues that seem to float to the top at this time, that there seems to be very little authority on behalf of the commission to address. One of those is on the use of real-time trail cameras. The commission does not have the authority to regulate the use of cameras, and trail cameras come in several varieties and use several different methods. Some trail cameras that you can simply put them along a trail or in the woods or what have you, and they take pictures. You have to go back to that camera, receive the chip out of that camera, and download that to determine what has walked by that camera. There are other cameras that use both video and still photography, and you can program those cameras so that they will send to your cell phone or your computer an instant, a real-time image of whatever just walked in front of that camera. We do not have, there's currently no method in statute to deal with the issues of and the questions of fair chase associated with that. In addition to that, as this committee is very familiar, there is no provisions in the statute right now to deal with the commercial sale of GPS locations that are collected on trophy class animals. And certainly as technology continues to advance, and we have seen that, like I said, over the last several decades, it certainly appears to us that that a very flexible and responsive solution to those problems would certainly be in order. So a couple of suggestions for the committee would be either legislation or looking at fair chase or restricting or regulating the methods of take. And the commission, under their duties and responsibilities, has broad latitude to establish seasons, firearms, and those types of issues, but not methods of take, nor is there any fair chase provisions in Title 23 of Wyoming statute. With that, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I would certainly answer any questions.
Thank you, Director, and that's exactly what we needed to hear, is to get to the meat of the issue. Let me step back for a second, and here's what my desire and my counterpart, my co-chairman on the Senate side, we discussed and considered our workload, LSO workload. And so what I would like to do, I'm not telling you how to vote, but what I'd like to do is early in this interim process, if we're going to move on any of these as committee bills, let's do it early in the process and have those. We deem as a committee that some of the issues that we're going to consider today and tomorrow are important enough for possibly having bills drafted. Then we meet again in August, we can refine those or reject those or adopt those. And then in November, we can finalize whatever else we have. The point is, what I would like to avoid is dumping a big workload on LSO in November. I'd rather get more work done early in the process. That gives the agencies, it gives LSO, it gives the public more time to consider these bill drafts so that we can put out a better product. Having said that, I have another question for you. Has anybody on our committee read that 54-page high technology white paper that the Game and Fish put out? I have. You have. I would.
2008.
No, it was January. I would highly recommend that. That really opened my eyes. It actually confirmed what I already thought, and that is what we just heard and what we heard throughout the session, which is high technology is advancing and evolving and emerging much quicker than we think. So I think, to me, the central issue here, and the director nailed it, is whether or not we want to consider giving the commission the authority to regulate emerging technology and or hunting methods. And that's our, in my opinion, that's our duty, our workload is to decide that, whether we do or don't. And if we do, how do we do that? The thing about this is, if you look at it from our point of view, from the legislative point of view, we're not very nimble. And the commission is, they meet 6 or 7 or 8 times a year. And so if, for example, if we give this authority to regulate weapons, technology and or hunting methods, then they can draft regulations with more public input than we can, because they'll go around the state and tell all the things that they do under the Administrative Procedures Act. So those are considerations for me. Now, having said that, as long as I have the floor, I'm going to ask the director, is fair chase defined in our statutes and or is it defined in the regulations? I think we all have a broad understanding of what it means, but does it go deeper than that?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, fair chase is not defined in statute nor commission regulation. The concept of fair chase is more general. I am aware that there are some other states that have quote unquote fair chase legislation, but I have not been able to get my hands on any of that. I can certainly get that provided to the committee if that's the desire of the committee.
Okay, and then I guess that was it. Any questions, Vice Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to see that fair chase legislation because I think it addresses the broader issue, which is things that we may not even anticipate in the future now. But if we have a standard of fair chase, that would kind of nail that down, and if there's other things that come up that we can't foresee right now, then it might apply.
Let me ask the director quickly. Would that be like chasing the Holy Grail, the $64,000 question? Try to define fair chase, and then what about enforcement aspects? How does that direct future legislatures and so, and the commission and the department staff, quite frankly?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, no, I don't think that it is. I think the concepts and the ideas behind fair chase are actually very well defined, and there may be some of those issues that we would need to look at very closely to ensure that, one, they're enforceable, and two, that they're detectable. But I think that we can look at some of the information provided by many of the national sporting organizations such as Boone and Crockett, Safari Club International. They have a very well-defined track record of methods that they accept as fair chase. And Boone and Crockett probably has spent more time defining fair chase than any other organization that I'm aware of. They actually have, if I remember correctly, they actually have a standard of fair chase that has to be adhered to in order for an animal to be registered in the Boone and Crockett books.
I think that, just for the committee's sake, fair chase is fairly universally understood, what it means and what it stands for. So I think it's up to the committee as to whether you want to throw that out as a committee bill draft. So, we're open.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Clem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, you had mentioned something in your remarks about a survey put out from University of Wyoming. I'm curious who's going to be the target audience. What's the scope of range? What's the scope of region? Are you going to be just targeting northwestern Wyoming? Is it going to be rural? Is it going to be more, I don't want to say urban, we don't really have urban, but more concentrated population areas? Those are some real questions that I have, just so that survey isn't skewed.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, we would do our very, very best to randomly survey hunters throughout the state of Wyoming and do our very best to make sure that that survey is statistically valid and reflect the opinions of the state of Wyoming.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Clem.
Thank you. So you mentioned hunters. Is it just going to be hunters, or is it going to be the general public at large? If you are targeting hunters, how do you know it hunters based on what? That's where I'm trying to get at. Is it just the hunting population, or is it the population at large?
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, right now it would be targeted toward license holders in the state of Wyoming, and I guess you could say that those would be hunters, but that would be the list that we would use right now as license holders.
Just one follow-up, Representative. Thank you. And is that going to be in-state license holders, or is that going to be in-state and out-of-state license holders?
Mr. Chairman, at this time, it's our plan to survey in-state license holders.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Flipner.
Thank you. Director Talbott, with fair chase legislation with fair chase legislation per se, would that allow you the latitude to, be flexible to meet, anything that would be thrown your way in terms of height?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think that depending on how that legislation was drafted, it could be very, very helpful and allow us that latitude. The only other suggestion that I would have in looking at this over the last couple of months is some legislation that would allow the commission to regulate the methods of take, and that would fall very close hand in hand with the fair chase, making sure that methods don't shock the conscience, if you will, and make sure that those methods are publicly acceptable and, as was mentioned earlier, more traditional, and obviously, I don't know that we need to go clear back to traditional, but I think there's a portion of hunting and fishing and angling that involves a methods portion of it and also a fair chase portion.
Follow up, or are you good?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Yeah, go ahead.
I forwarded both you and Senator, your co-chairman, the information that I had received from my a game and fish biologist in my region, and if I might just share this with
Go ahead.
our audience. The Bighorn National Forest have received a request from a company that is wanting to put hundreds of trail cams on our national forests. And it said, if I might quote, the Grand Mesa National Forest in Colorado received this request to put up hundreds of game cameras, which would feed into a smartphone application that hunters would pay for. Grand Mesa denied the request for several reasons, including concerns about fair chase hunting, concerns with conflicts with permitted outfitters, and general privacy of forest users. The Bighorn National Forest Supervisor, they were looking for some guidance and some regulation from the state of Wyoming, I believe, to back up their denial. And so I felt like this was very timely in regard to this conversation. And so just bear that in mind when you're thinking, you're making your decisions. This is the kind of stuff that we're game and fish is going to be faced with.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that with us. Let me throw something out here. It is my desire, if somebody makes the motion, I would vote for a bill that would look at giving the commission the authority to regulate emerging technology and hunting methods. And the reason, well, for all those reasons. But, so I'm tipping my hat here in my hand. But the other thing is, let me ask you this. Would it be better for the state of Wyoming if we took fair chase rather than hazard? Because quite honestly, that is a fairly subjective term. It can mean different things to different people. So what does it mean to the game warden in the field? What does it mean to the sporting goods stores and so forth? So maybe at the very beginning of the statutes where the commission is granted authority to regulate wildlife, what if there was some language in there that said that it is the desire of the state to manage wildlife under sort of a fair chase model, something to that effect, and not use it as not have it be a bludgeon in a game warden's toolkit, but yet provide direction for future legislators, future department staff, future commissioners, and the hunting public. What say you?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, certainly in the powers and duties in the commission under 23.1.302, the legislature has granted broad authority to the commission. And for example, when it comes to licensing and dealing with those issues, the legislature has literally charged the commission with developing systems for licensing. And that is the only parameters that are set up on there as far as the management of wildlife. And should it be this committee and the legislature's pleasure, I think that if you all would pass some sort of a bill that allowed the commission the authority to regulate methods of take set on the standards of fair chase. Fair chase could be, and as you have said several times, Mr. Chairman, all of our regulations go through the Administrative Procedures Act. There's a number of public meetings, and the public has many opportunities to comment on that. And if that were the case, and methods, including cameras and those types of things were included, we can promulgate regulations that could be provided to the public, so the public was very clear on what was legal and what was not legal, and we could move forward from there.
Representative Talbott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to be very careful that, okay, here's my concern, and if you'd address it. For example, Boone and Crockett emphasizes the trophy instead of the hunter or owner, and accepts hunter-taken trophies harvested with any equipment legal in the state or province where the animal was taken. How keen is the department in acknowledging the possibility that this might put our Wyoming hunters at a disadvantage. If we restrict the $10,000 rifle, for example, would they, the owner of his new $10,000 rifle, be more apt to go to another state where that's legal? I wonder if we risk losing hunters that come into Wyoming to states that allow them to use their high-tech gadgetry. Do you see that as a consideration in the commission's implementation of any method of harvest regulations?
Director?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Halverson, I'm sitting here trying to think of some methods and some examples that might fall into that. The commission right now has the authority to regulate firearms, and the $10,000 rifle is clearly legal in Wyoming right now. Should the advent of the smart rifle, the computerized rifle, become a significant issue in Wyoming, that's something that the commission has the authority to regulate at this time. As far as other methods and looking at other states where issues like party hunting or the use of artificial light or those types of things are legal, I don't think that, I think there's enough difference between the states right now between what is legal and what is not legal, the use of dogs and those types of things, that I don't think it would have any impact on our ability to recruit hunters. Right now, the state of hunting in Wyoming is very good, and we have far more applicants than we have licensed opportunities for those people.
Thank you. Yeah.
Let's do Senator Bonner first, and then Representative Clemens.
Okay, just to follow up on that question, I guess, do you have any specific examples of other states that have maybe taken steps to regulate some of these new advances like technology, especially neighboring states? Do you have anything specific that our neighbors are doing?
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bonner, I don't. I don't know what Colorado, Nebraska, other states have done on cameras or smart rifles or those types of things. I guess I would throw out an example. Several years ago, there was a online computer-aided hunting system that came up where you could get online and push a button on a computer. Almost all states immediately outlawed that, and as did we. So there's some cohesiveness there, but I don't have a number of excellent examples.
Director and Senator Bonner, that is in that 54-page high-tech hunting report that the department put out. They have quite a few comparisons on rifles or methods or whatever, state by state, maybe not every state, but there's one thing that's pretty clear to me is that every state has jurisdiction and privacy over wildlife. So they regulate it however they see fit. But Jeff,
No, Mr. Chairman, depending on what the committee does moving forward, I think that probably be good to have everybody to look at that report, and so we have an understanding what the environment that we're making legislation.
Could LSO send those or to the committee? Maybe the department can send those to LSO, and you can send them out to the committee. That 54, I believe it's 54 pages, isn't it? That high-tech hunting report. That'd be good. Representative Clinton.
Trying to grapple with Director, maybe give me some feedback and do a follow-up. Is this, you said the state regarding hunting is very strong. So I'm trying to figure out, is this a legitimate, and I don't mean it in a condescending kind of way, but is this a legitimate concern? Or is this, are we searching for a problem to fix so that we have work to do in the interim? Quite frankly, that's kind of what I'm asking people. I'm trying to figure out emerging technology, is this really an issue? Because I haven't heard it being a huge issue in my future. So if I can get your feedback on that, and then
Director? Mr. Chairman, Representative, I guess all I would provide on that is that the issue of sale of GPS locations has had for the taking of trophy animals was brought to our attention. It was also brought to the legislature's attention. And the issue of trail cameras that was relayed to the committee by one of your members just a moment ago. We talked a bit about that. The issue of other technologies such as artificial light, firearms, and that was very successful.
So the follow-up on that, and this is where I'm struggling a little bit with this. Colleague here to the right of me, I struggle a little bit because we're going to take this approach where we define a subjective term, which is fair chase, and we put it objectively in statute. This is what fair chase shall be. And then we decide what methods are approved and what methods aren't approved. That gets in a little bit of, are we squashing innovation? Are we squashing freedom? Are we squashing liberty in the state for hunters? The other thing about that is I'm just looking at other departments. What if we told the Department of Education, you shall teach according to traditional methods? We don't do that. Of course, right now it's progressive methods that they use. Same thing with DOT. You shall pave the roads in this particular method and to the exclusion of everything else, despite what emerging technology may come. So those are some issues that I'm grappling with, and I'm curious, I guess, for your thoughts is, as the director of the Game and Fish, would this kind of thing be unique to your department, or can you give me some examples of other departments where we say these are methods that you shall use and what you shall not use?
Director, Mr. Chairman, Representative Clem, I think that the commission also asked that same question, and that's why they directed us to go out and survey the public and see what the public told us on that issue.
Anybody? Representative Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, so help me out here. I just want to make sure that I understand what we're talking about here is, in theory, just hypothetically. If we adopt some sort of fair chase doctrine, loosely based, and then turn the regulatory rules and promulgation of rules and regulations over to the Game and Fish Department. What if we were to add to that, then there's some sort of either sunset provision or report back to us on our some time frame base to monitor how it's going. Going back to my colleague's question about how much of a problem is it? Well, we don't know. Or as the co-chair is my favorite saying, we don't know what we don't know. So that way we could kind of watch how this is going, because just like my kids and their phones, they seem to always be one step ahead of me on what, I try to put in little things with the phone so I can watch what they're doing, and they know how to defeat every single one of them. And so I kind of got a feeling over this time, I've heard this story before. So is that along the lines of what you're asking us to do, or hypothetically suggesting that we do?
Director.
Not about my kids.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that was certainly a prerogative of the legislature, and their opinion. As always, we would certainly
Any other questions, committee? What's the, oh, yeah, go ahead. Thank you. Representative Haley.
Director, in your view, is there one or two of these emerging technologies that are going to chase things that get animals and others?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Haley, I think the two issues that we are hearing most about right now is the issue of the sale of GPS coordinates to harvest large trophy class animals and the use of real-time trail cameras. Those are the two issues that we're hearing the most about right now.
Thank you. So let me speculate. If the legislature provides authority to regulate that type of technology to the department, what would you see happening? Obviously, it would go to the commission and they would determine that. But can you just give us a look into the future?
Well, I can, Mr. Chairman, I can certainly try, and certainly if the legislature granted the commission the authority to regulate methods or fork churches or however that came out, we would embark on a regulation process. We'd go through the Administrative Procedures Act. Most generally, legislation goes into effect July 1. It takes us about 3.5 to 4 months to promulgate a regulation, take public input, take it before the commission and have it enacted as regulatory provisions. So, and as you're well aware, those are approved through Management Council with the Secretary of State signed off on by the governor.
Committee, what's your pleasure? Oh, excuse me, one last. Senator Barner, go ahead.
Chairman and Director Talbott, I have some questions. I know that the Game and Fish Commission is granted a lot of leeway, and I just want to make the point that they are appointed and the legislature is elected. We represent the people, and they in a way do also. But my question and my concern is, if the department gives the Game and Fish Commission permission to do something and to control a method of hunting, I would like the legislature somehow to be in the loop here and find out what that is before they have their hearings and before they do that. And so that we have a chance to comment on that before it's taken to the public in the form of the commissions announcing their intentions. And I don't know how that's going to fit in, but that's one of the things that I'm concerned with. And I also have a question about, Mr. Talbott, does the Game and Fish Commission make the rules and then get comments on it, or do they have proposed rules and then have the meetings and get comments on it and then make their rules? What's the exact procedure that happens in that?
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I believe that the legislatures are on the interested parties list for all our regulations. And if you are not, we can certainly place you on the interested parties list. And what the interested parties list is a list of people that every time we promulgate a regulation, we send that regulation to you for your comment. And if you're not on that list and you would like to be on that list, we'll send you a lot of paperwork. But we maintain the interested parties list in accordance with the Administrative Procedures Act. And any member of the public who wants to be on that list can call our office or let us know that they want to be on the interested parties list. And then you get every piece of information on every rule that we promulgate. And so that goes to Management Council, it goes to the Secretary of State, and we send it to many hundreds of people around the state every time we promulgate a regulation. So if you're not on that list and you'd like to be on that list, it would be our pleasure to put you on that list, and you'll have a lot to read at night when you go. And then as far as the process goes, is that, for example, when the legislature provided authority to the ability, the opportunity to the commission to generate the 365-day license, we look at other state regulations. We model a draft regulation. We send that through the process, and that proposed regulation gets reviewed by the governor's office. It gets reviewed by Management Council. LSO takes a look at that, and then we take it out for public comment. It's a draft regulation at that point, We analyze public comment, we present public comment to the commission. They adopt some public comment, they reject other public comments, and then there's a finalized regulation. It also goes through that same process for final adoption. Very much.
Senator Moniz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Talbott, I'm trying to visualize the trail camera regulation. You try to regulate it on the LA property, Forest Service property, public property, state property, where I'm trying to visualize how this would work.
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I'm not sure at this point how it would work. You know, and if I look at many of our regulations and many of the statutes that you all pass, and there are different specifications on public land versus private land, and for example, outfitting and those type of things. If you're going to outfit on public land, you have to have a license. If you just get outfit on lands owned by you, you don't have to. Hunter safety. If you're going to hunt on public land, you have to have hunter safety. If you're going to hunt on lands owned by your own family, you don't have to. So I think that would be something that we've developed through the process.
Just a quick follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Senator. My concern is private property rights. I know a number of people out there. Public property. That's my concern.
Yes, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, we are very cognizant of private property rights, and we certainly don't want to infringe on those either.
I think I'm going to break protocol slightly. If you would stay there, the department, and I'd like to solicit comments from the public before we possibly consider a bill draft. Go ahead. Just please stand up, state your name, who you represent, and where you're from, if you don't mind.
Chairman Allen, members of the committee, I'm Lee Livingston.
Quickly.
I'm a member of the Wyoming Outfitter and Guides Association. I'm on their board, and a couple of these issues we've brought forward. They've been of a concern to us in the industry. The selling of GPS locations is one that was brought forward by us that concerns us greatly. It's been my position, at least on federal lands, federal managed lands, that is a commercial operation that is being done without a commercial operating permit. And some of that should fall back on the Land Management Agency. They have been reluctant to pursue that. So that's why we've come to the legislation asking for help there. The methods of take, I gotta back up a little bit here on the fair chase. While it is clearly defined, as clear as it can be, within organizations such as Boone and Crockett, I guess I might disagree with the good director a little bit on this. Would be easy to go forward with legislation. I'm concerned about trying to legislate fair chase. It's a little bit like trying to legislate morality. Once it becomes law, then it's a slippery slope. And I'm not saying it cannot be done. I just believe it needs to be approached very cautiously. And another approach might be to, again, regulate methods of take. And therefore you're defining the fair methods of take. So, quid pro quo, you're defining fair chase. It does concern me in my industry, and also as a hunter myself, the advent of smart rifles, of 1,000-yard rifles. I mean, I applaud anybody. I can't hit anything to 1,000 yards. I don't care what gun you give me. But I applaud anyone that is able to hit a target at 1,000 yards. But a target is different than a living animal. I make my living, in the mountains. I make my living hunting wildlife and pursuing wildlife. And wildlife is not a target. But there's a lot of things that can occur from 1,000 yards away. I've always thought that it was my job as a guide and as a personal, as a hunter, hunting personally and with my children, that we get as close as we can to ensure that we have a clean kill. So, but it's just really, I just see it as a very tough issue to tackle. I'm not saying it shouldn't be. I'm not saying the legislation should be afraid to tackle it. But again, it needs to be approached cautiously. It doesn't need to be looked at, but approached cautiously.
Let me clarify what needs to be approached carefully. Defining fair chase or defining hunting methods?
Both, Mr. Chairman.
All right. What about emerging technology? What are your thoughts on that?
I think we need to try and get out ahead of it. Mr. Chairman, I think we need to try and get out ahead of it. I think it's, again, it's going to be difficult. But it can be done. It can be done. Someone, I believe it might have been Representative Clem, asked if other states have different regulations. Crossbows are legal in Wyoming. Legal archery tackle, crossbows are legal. There are other states where they're not legal. I get questions from clients across the U.S. I didn't know I can bring my crossbow. I didn't know I could bring my crossbow, because where they're from, they're illegal. So there are methods of, technology that is regulated differently in different states. So it can be done. It does need to be addressed. It needs to be hopefully gotten out ahead of. But there are some things out there that we haven't even, there's things we're looking at today we never thought we'd see. And so along those lines, I know there is more out there that we can't fathom right now.
Thank you. Committee? All right, anybody else in the audience like to speak on this topic?
Mr. Chairman, Bob Ward with Wyoming Sportsman for Fish and Wildlife. And I guess I share some of the same concerns. I think this is a boondoggle. And as I've listened to the discussions, I'm not going to say that it's not warranted that we look at this stuff, but I guess I'm going to go back to the example that Director Talbott mentioned. I believe it was Texas when they came up with a remote hunting system. And it was a matter of seconds, I should say, probably was a matter of a week, but it was rather rapidly and resolutely defeated in all the states. And to me, that's a clear direction. One of the problems that I see, I think those of us that hunt are concerned very much about the proverbial camel getting its nose in the tent. And I think that's what this is an attempt to do, is to stop that. And I agree that we need to be vigilant and try to do what we can, but I think this is the wrong direction. I can tell you, the guys I talk to, my members, we're tired of all the regulations. We feel like we're regulating to death. We want to go back to simpler, easier terms. There was a time when it was a lot easier, a lot funner, a lot more enjoyable. There's a lot of people who don't hunt anymore just because the regulations are so complex. They're worried they're going to get in trouble and get a citation, so they avoid it. And I think the more complicated we make this, the harder it is to recruit people in. And so I think it comes back to how we do things. I look back growing up, the ethics stuff that we're talking about, that's all taught at hunter safety. That's all taught through our family. Those are things that we teach as we mentor people. And I think that's a better direction, is to put more of a focus and emphasis on how we educate, how we recruit sportsmen, and let us police our own ranks. That's how we've always done it in the past. And things that are perceived as unethical, we keep out just by our own acceptance of those practices. Now, it won't work 100% of the time, but it's obvious the more blatant the approach is, the quicker the response is going to be. And the problem I see is we're all over the page. I guarantee you, you can put this out. It's like preference points. I can tell you, we keep asking that question. It's going to keep coming back the same thing. You're going to have half the people wanting to have it regulated and half not. And to me, it becomes problematic when you turn that over to the commission and say, go ahead and draft rules and regulations, because rules and regulations do have the same effect as law. And I think you guys need to be cognizant of that. You are giving them the authority to basically create law through rules and regulations, but it isn't, to me, the same process as what we see through the legislature. So in short, Mr. Chairman, that is what I think. I think it's the wrong direction to go. I think,
not to interrupt you, but I need to, what is it to regulate
pursue
emerging technology?
Pursue legislation or regulation to address an ethical problem. We can't legislate, and I don't think we can regulate ethics. I think it comes from us, the
Let me
participants.
interrupt you again. Are you talking about fair chase, defining that, or are you talking about, to me, it's two different things.
Well,
It's a different discussion. So there's whether or not we define fair chase and whether or not we regulate emerging technology and methods. And so, yeah, they're kind of part and parcel, but the commission already has the authority to regulate weapons. They do not have the authority to regulate technology. Should we or not give them that authority?
And that's what I'm saying, Mr. Chairman. I think it's the wrong direction to go. Look at regulating it or legislating it. I think it's to incorporate it in our hunter safety classes. And whether we come up with a new way to encourage guys like me that aren't, you know, I hate to say when I was born, but I'm old enough, I don't need hunter safety. I've taken it. But maybe we need to have some incentive for guys like me to take another hunter safety class. Maybe they get a bonus point or something. I don't know. We can be creative in how we do this, but I think it's better to go through the way we educate hunters and sportsmen rather than go through and try to regulate or legislate something that you can't forecast or see.
And we really have a timeline here,
Yep.
but let me ask you a quick question. I want a quick answer. Hundreds of trail cams on the national forest selling that information, yes or no?
I personally myself think
Yes or
it's
no?
a bad idea.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else in the public want to speak?
If I can, I think there was a question, but
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ward, so how would you address some of these issues that are coming in from outside the state that are selling our information on the internet and causing a situation that fair chase isn't being ethically respected?
well then, Mr. Chairman and Representative Steinmetz, I really think it's self-regulating. These guys that are trying to do it, I think it's going to be a flash in the pan, especially if we start educating the kids coming up through the ranks that that's an unaccepted practice. You should go find this stuff on your own. It's a lot like what Lee said. I think, you know, we need to promote actual hunting, the traditional hunting, you going out, you locating your animal. There's no doubt there's a role that the outfitting, the industry can provide for sportsmen. But I do think it comes back to us teaching the proper methodology. And I think that's one of the things we should teach in class is you go find it yourself. And if you don't have the time, you can go hire somebody to help you. But to go out and hire somebody to set out trail cams, do all this stuff, you're short circuiting. That's not how we get people to get excited about hunting. It's teaching them how to short circuit the system. So I think it's self-defeating myself. But it comes back to how we're teaching, educating, recruiting new people into the sport.
Okay, we really got to.
You're good. I just didn't know.
Be briefer. Go ahead, Representative.
So, Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Mr. Wharf. So if the state of Wyoming just adopted the fair chase doctrine, so to speak, would that not provide at least the state of Wyoming with at least hunters, whether they be resident or non-resident hunters, they understand that the state of Wyoming follows that practice? That wouldn't be impeding on anybody's religious liberties or rights, would it?
No, Mr. Chairman, Representative Flitter, I believe that's already the case. I think we already know what fair chase is. I think it's already well defined in the state. I guess that's my point.
Well, that's my question.
I think it's already defined.
Director Talbott, if you could answer that, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Sure, and I would still want I would like the opportunity for other members of the public, and we've got to move on. Director, do you have, is that a question for the director? Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I guess if you're asking the question, is fair chase well defined in statute and regulation? I would respond that there is no formal definition of fair chase in either Wyoming statutes or regulations.
Yeah, you bet. Any other members of the public on this emerging technology? Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After listening to the discussion, I think we need to define fair chase, but I would move that we initiate intended legislation that will give the commission the ability to regulate methods, and this methods of hunting. Brought motion, but this will involve selling for commercial advancement. Make it broad, because technology is going to catch up with us faster than we can deal with it as legislation. I think we have to give the commission the ability to be nimble, to see what's coming, to deal with it in a fair and equitable manner. And I would love to have this legislation developed with as many individual groups as possible. That's why I want to start it now. LSO, outfitters, game and fish, interested parties, other groups. I don't want to find, in this motion, the motion is very simple. I want to give them the ability to regulate methods of hunting that do not involve commercial game.
That includes emergency technology, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I want to make it broad enough by saying methods that will include emerging technologies. I'd like to be able to give them the ability to regulate things as they come. And finally, one other point, I'd like it to sunset in 6 years to see where we go.
Is there a second? Yeah. Who said that? Is there a second? Okay. Moved by Chairman Emmerich and seconded by representing committee. Discussion?
Mr. Chairman, what parameters are we putting on this thing?
No.
Mr. Chairman, I'm unclear what I'm voting on exactly as far, I mean, I know we don't need exact language, but I think there needs to be some kind of language for LSO, some kind of direction. Are we just saying that we're going to give the commission all the authority and let them make all the rules and regulations in regard to fair chase? Is that what I'm hearing?
Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
Yes, that's exactly it, because I want to be able to see where we've got when we come to the next meeting in August. I'd like to have those things defined, the little parameters, because there's going to be some things that I put in this motion that I hadn't thought about. That's what I want to see between now and August. If we've got a valid path here, because there's going to be something come up. Floyd out there may come up and bring me an idea that I hadn't even thought about for this legislation. That's why I want to start it now, so we can hash this out.
Is that broad enough or specific enough direction for LSO to begin the bill draft if it passes?
Mr. Chairman, what I understand right now would be a bill draft that would grant the Game and Fish Commission authority to regulate methods of hunting, the use and sale of information commercially, and emerging technology.
Senator
Mr. Chairman, just to further clarify, so we're talking about both the powers and duties of the Game and Fish Commission and the outfitters and guides licensing, or are we talking about just the Game and Fish Commission? Or if we're talking about also the cell location system that's going to cell wildlife location system is going to be more in line with outfitters and guides as opposed to Game and Fish. My pleasure.
I'm going to defer to the regular motion.
I want this initial motion to be broad, where we can gather information from many different places, and we tighten it up through August and into November. Maybe we'll have some legislation that will fit those, would answer those questions, because we don't know what we don't know, and I think by pursuing legislation through this methodology, I think we can probably come up with something reasonable, or we'll just crash it in November. But I think we need to get more input in the interest of time around this meeting. I want to start now.
Just might be useful for also to have more specific direction that I think can be useful for the committee to have. If we're having this discussion, I think it's useful to have something in front of us for our next meeting, absolutely. But you know that whatever clarity we can provide now will be useful for that process moving forward.
So we want more specificity here.
Right. Well, we have to over-talk about it, I guess. And so, I mean, we're talking about giving all these powers to Game and Fish, we're also talking about the outfitters and guides and licensing authority as well.
throw something out for the committee to consider. Now, there is a statute here that's, the commission shall establish by rule and regulation firearm and ammunition specifications for, it goes on, it's really brief. I think if LSO might distill this down to something simple like that, possibly, it could be commission shall establish by rule and regulation. The regulation relates to emerging technology and hunting methods, something along those lines. Is that just correct? Okay. Is that specific?
Sure, if that helps.
Anybody else have any concerns or questions? Representative Bittner?
Mr. Chairman, I just worry that, I mean, we're already hearing some dissension in the room today. I just wonder if we're going to be in the same situation that we were last session, where we specifically had a piece of legislation that would address this issue, but it did not go over well. What if we were to just adopt the fair chase doctrine? Would that be broad enough that it would appease hunters and anglers? You would be opposed to that? No, you would not be opposed to that. So I don't know. It's just, I just wondered if it was broad enough that it would allow them the authority to regulate as needed, but yet it would also meet with the approval of our outfitters, guides, and hunters. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Steinmetz, and then I want to speak to them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and maybe I should have let you go first, but that's the same thing I was wondering, because that way then we kind of have a solid footing for everyone who's operating, rather than giving the commission broad authority to just, I mean, that, I think that's what everyone's kind of concerned about.
So let's back up. Let's look at what we're trying to do as part of the interim work. What we address, as each of our committees address, are issues that come up before us. Okay, and this is not new stuff. This is, let me just give you a little history on the House Bill 5. I actually asked the majority coordinator to hold that back. Okay, he didn't. That was my call. And the reason I did that was because we were running out of time. It was a budget session, and those are high bars for those bills. It would have taken 40 votes on the floor of the House to get that to move forward. And quite frankly, our workload was strong. And so I also realized that this is, if we had taken that approach, let's say it passed and became law, all we're really doing is we're doing the onesies and twosies, one at a time legislation as these emerging technologies pop up. So I thought, with some consultation with some of you, some of the department staff, that maybe it made more sense to take the broader view and look at whether or not to give the commission the authority to regulate technology as it pops up, because they don't have it right now. They have the authority to regulate weapons, but not how you use them. And nor do they have the authority to regulate things that didn't exist, like real-time game cameras, these smart rifles that won't fire until everything's lined up. That's in that report. My goodness gracious, that's not, to me, that's not fair. It gives an advantage to some segment of the hunting public over others. It is, in my opinion, the game doesn't have a chance. If you can nail a trophy at 1,200 yards, you're not the hunter, the rifle is. So to me, that's the issue here. I just don't see any reason that we can't possibly go forward with the bill draft. We may stumble, we may fall, it may not be the best product, but that's the process. We have 2 more meetings to refine this. And once we get something, if we do, we may not, but if we get some kind of a committee bill draft out of here today, then the process starts. And like the chairman says, we don't know what we don't know. We're going to find out. So, did that help? Okay. Committee, what's your pleasure? Good. All right. All in favor of this committee bill draft as specific or non-specific as it may be, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Bill passed, or the committee bill draft passed. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a potential bill that was raised by the audience. I thought it was not a bad approach to make this motion for bill draft. This would be a preference point bill that would grant additional preference point for those taking hunter safety. And it would be, as far as parameters here, I want there to be a 5-year limit. So in other words, a person couldn't take it every year and get a preference point, but one perhaps preference point within a 5-year period. So 5 years they take hunter safety, 5 years again they take it again, and you get it. It's a refresher. It keeps people up to speed and it promotes the ethics. So anyway, that's the bill. That's what I'm.
And I would second that.
Oh, okay. All right. So you have Brent go, didn't let me ask you, is it all right if we hear the presentation from the department first on the whole issue, or do you want to move this?
Mr. Chairman, I think this falls right. This falls right in line with the discussion. My view is this is just a different approach. The approach that we're taking before, I feel, which is why I would know, it's more of a top-down approach. This is more of a person in the field educating people of the ethics of fair chase. More of a grassroots approach. And so I think this falls right in line. So I would welcome any committee discussion just like we had with the last post.
Sure. And I appreciate that. I think it's a great idea. My question is this, just procedural. Because if we follow the agenda, they're up next, and they're going to discuss preference points in general. And then, to me, it makes more sense to incorporate that in as to whether or not we do a bill draft on some part of preference points, including that. I think it's a great idea. So I don't know if we're putting dust before the horses or what. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason I seconded this, I think is perfectly in line with what's on the table right now. The ethics of fair chase, what that could look like in 5 years, the ethics of technology in the field, what that could look like next year. We have a list of all the high tech available to hunters now, but what's it going to be next year or in 2 years as this technology advances? I think this is a perfect place for this.
And I don't disagree. But I'm going to use my chairman's prerogative. I'm just going to say, hold that thought. We're not going to vote on it until we hear the preference point information from them. We'll come back. Okay. Thank you. Director, would you like to lead us into the preference point discussion?
Sure.
Excuse me. Go ahead, Senator Anselmi Dahl.
Thank you, Mr.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering, if we should alternatively try to say that we would adopt a fair chase doctrine, if we should have an alternative bill draft. It's a question, and if they don't like it, that's fine. It's just an idea.
And we just voted to approve it. That was a draft committee bill, so I'm not sure what are we going backwards now?
Alternative bills, just one to regulate technology, which is what we said to give the Game and Fish Authority, right? And then the second one was whether we'd adopt just fair chase doctrine as a state of Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, I didn't address you.
Mr. Chairman,
Hold on just a second.
Mr. Chairman, I moved to give the Game and Fish Commission the ability to regulate. Did not bring fair chase in because we're going to allow the commission by rule and regulation to define fair chase in this methodology, not define fair chase. I don't think you can define fair chase. It's a different opinion, but we're going to give them the ability to, in their opinion, define fair chase without using the term.
When it works,
Excuse me, I really apologize. That comes first.
it's not an issue. We do have a motion on the floor. It's been moved and seconded. supposed to take action on that. I will refer to your judgment in listening to preference points, so I'm going to withdraw my motion. But I think procedurally, we need to do that before we move on. So,
Yeah, I apologize for that. Would you like to proceed on the reference point issue?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, may I have?
Sure.
I'm glad all of this technology is recording everything, but I can't hear half the committee. When they use the microphone down there, I can hear them, but I can't hear Co-Chairman Emmerich. And if that could be addressed at some point,
Just have everybody speak louder.
maybe that's what we need.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the next agenda item you have is an agenda item that the committee has asked us to bring forward. This was an issue that you heard about in the last legislative session, and actually it is very, very narrow in scope. During the last legislative session, there were some individuals who approached the legislature on the requirement under law for the commission to eliminate preference points for any individual who has not applied for a preference point for 2 years in a row. That legislation is referenced under Wyoming Statute 23-1703B, and in that law, it states, for the purposes of assigning preference points under this subsection, any unsuccessful applicant failing to apply for a license or pay the application fee in lieu of applying during the second calendar year shall be considered to be a first-year applicant in any subsequent calendar year in which the applicant submits license application for that particular species. Further in statute, Wyoming Statute 23-101M, it directs the commission to promulgate rules that may provide for the loss of all accumulated preference points for persons failing to apply or pay in the in lieu fee in 2 consecutive calendar years. Mr. Chairman, just a little bit of background information for the committee's consideration. Chapter 44 of Wyoming Game and Fish Commission regulation sets forth the rules for applying for and receiving preference points in line with the statutory provisions. And currently for bighorn sheep and moose, we have been issuing preference points in accordance with statutes for 23 years. Right now, in accordance with statute, we have been issuing non-resident deer, elk, and antelope preference points for 12 years. Cost of a resident bighorn sheep or moose preference point is $7. Currently, the cost of a bighorn sheep or moose preference point is $150. Non-resident elk preference points are $52. Non-resident deer preference points are $41, and non-resident antelope preference points are $31. In 2017, we eliminated 11,000 customers with 34,000 preference points because they did not apply for preference points as required in statute 2 years in a row. Most generally, we eliminate those points because the applicant has failed to apply, the person has been deceased, they are no longer eligible, and that is the case where a non-resident becomes a resident. If a non-resident moves to Wyoming and they have accumulated non-resident deer, elk, or antelope preference points, we have to eliminate those after 2 years because those points are not available for residents. However, with bighorn sheep and moose, because those preference points apply to both residents and non-residents, those points are transferable back and forth. Also, for the committee's information, when we go approach eliminating those preference points, in August of each year, we send an email to every person who's in jeopardy of losing those preference points, and that's about 15, almost 16,000 emails to individuals advising them that if they don't apply by the end of September deadline, that they will lose their preference points. In addition to that, we mail a personal letter to every individual, and last year we sent out 19,273 letters to those people who are at risk of losing their preference points after the emails, and certainly there's some overlap there because we don't have emails for every individual. But we do our very best to notify them that they are at risk of losing their preference points. However, as obvious to the committee and others, that after 23 years, folks have a fair amount of investment in those preference points, and we get calls from individuals who, for a variety of reasons, whether it's death in the family, weddings during the summer, what have you, do not apply for those preference points. And according to statute, we eliminate those preference points after 2 years if individuals have not applied. So that's the issue that has been brought forth to the legislature, and I will try to answer any questions the committee may have.
I can shed a little bit of light on that situation since that's what I've been doing all my life. I can tell you that preference points are fairly lucrative for the department. Let's see, I have those notes somewhere, but it's in the neighborhood of $9 million. And I believe that's annually $9,123,000. So it's a source of revenue that is voluntary to the department, but as the director mentioned, after a while, there's a fairly large investment, not only in money, but also in just sort of, people feel like they deserve a license after a point, okay? And so if they, through moving to Florida to retire and having a different address and having the department not be able to get a hold of them, or through various other problems, they sometimes lose their points. They forget, they're whatever. Well, they get pretty mad, don't they, Director? And I've had some of those phone calls, and I'm sure the department has had some of those phone calls. And it's really about goodwill. Does the state of Wyoming really want to continue this policy? So I've checked around and I've said, what is the reason for this? And the only possible reason that might make any sense for the elimination of preference points after 2 years is that legislation may have been developed before email and computer technology that could more easily track this stuff. And so it is a burden, as the director pointed out, to send these letters. It costs a lot of money to send paper letters and staff time and so forth. My question is, why do we even need to have a limitation? If people want to buy a preference point every 10 years, who cares? It's really, in my opinion, I think we should eliminate that section of the statute that, unless somebody's got a better idea, why do we limit those to 2 years in a row, you're gone? Who cares? So that's my input.
I do have a question.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Could you respond to that, Director? What's the history of the preference point issue, and what's your thoughts on this?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, that was put in the original preference points language when that bill was adopted 24 years ago. That was one of the parameters that was set forth, that if an individual didn't apply 2 years in a row, that they were kicked out of the system. And certainly 24 years ago, we have a much different licensing system now than we did then, and it's much easier for us to track those kind of things and also to notify people of that, even though there is still a large number of sportsmen that we don't have an email address for, and we end up sending them a letter. But I think the original intent behind that, some almost 25 years ago, was one is it would be very difficult for us to track it long term, which is not the case now. And two, I think that there was a portion of the discussion, if a person wasn't serious about it, he would remove them from the system. And we can clearly track individuals as long as it's the desire of this body for us to track them. If you want to put in a 5-year, 3, a 5, a 7, a 17-year, and we can track that very easily through our computer systems now.
Co-chairman.
Director, do you see any unforeseen circumstances, unintended consequences of eliminating the number of years in preference?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, from an administrative standpoint, I see none whatsoever. We're certainly tracking individuals with 1 to 23 years of preference points, and we have some issues when people change their name from marriages and divorces, those types of things, but we work our way through that. So I don't see an issue from an administrative standpoint.
Members, any other questions for the director? Comments from the public? Comments? Public comment closed. Meeting with your pleasure. Take action or don't take action?
Eliminate preference points.
Been moved in
Timeline.
What?
The director, the chairman, co-chairman, Emery moved to eliminate the timeline for the time level. Not just stated.
Just eliminate the time, to hold the time limit on preference points. Totally.
Second. And seconded by Representative Flynn. Any more discussion? Committee? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay. Mr. Chair, if you would draft a bill, please, that would be great. Yes, go ahead.
This time I wouldn't make that motion that I did before. But a bill draft or a point bill for persons taking hunter safety and an additional preference point, but not more than one within a 5 year.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Could you hear all of that down there at the other end? Okay, committee, questions, comments? Senator Bowman.
Mr. Chairman, it's been a while since I've taken hunter safety. Can I just get a refresher on who determines what the course material is and what's taught? How does that work?
Go ahead, Director.
Or Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
Chairman, Randy McKee, Communications Director for Game and Fish, and I oversee the Hunter Ed course. So that is set forth. We control our hunter education materials and test. If you may recall, and we may have some folks here who've taught that Hunter Ed. It is taught either by Game and Fish employees or by volunteers, and the volunteers recoup $10 per person for costs of the program. And thankfully, we have about 500 active volunteers across the state, and we do about 5,000 students a year through the Hunter Education Program. And the content of that is something we determine. There is an online version that we work with the company to provide, but students who do that still have to do, we call it an internet field day, so there is some field requirements on that. But one thing to keep in mind is that a hunter can go and get hunter education from a different state and meet their qualifications. And there are many states now moving to do online only hunter education, so they have no field experiences. We do not mandate that a student has to interact with a firearm to either do target practice or even just an inert firearm. That's certainly what we like, but there is some discretion left to a volunteer within some parameters about what they do. So it would be incredible to, I think, continue to encourage people to take this and even potentially take like a refresher version of it to keep up with it. I think that a couple of the thoughts are to those of us who believe strongly in making sure people have the latest information, really do like to try to have as much out of class experience as well, and not to be moving towards online only. But there certainly is a lot of demand for online only hunter education. And so if you're close to going out in the field and you don't have your hunter ed, people will jump on Nebraska's website and do their hunter ed and get their card, and then they're eligible to hunt in Wyoming with that Nebraska hunter education course.
motion.
Follow up, quick
follow-up. I think that 5-year timeline is a good timeline for refresher trainings in terms of how much you update the course material. Is that the right timeline to keep folks up to date, or could be more, could be less?
Sure. It's about actually a 5-year that was mentioned for the.
For the motion that we're talking about, you know, you can basically be incentivizing folks to take hunter safety once every 5 years. You think that's a good time limit in terms of how much you update the course, how often you update the course materials?
Mr. Chairman, I would say it is about every 5 years we update the test. It's a fairly substantial cost to update that test because it's a paper version that's administered in person. But we are always trying to keep it fresh, but with costs, it's only usually updated every 5 years.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I was thinking of this, just my sponsors approval here, and just would like to add some parameters to the potential draft. That is simply that this would have to be a Wyoming hunter's education certificate as approved, or of course, as approved by the department. Furthermore, there would need to be, in order to gain a preference point, there would need to be some certification by the department, or confirmation that yes, this person indeed took a Wyoming hunter's education course as approved by the department.
Let me throw something out if I could. Apparently this microphone doesn't work, or it's hard to hear.
Speak into it.
And is that better? Okay. Let me throw something out. I'm not against this motion. I think it's a great motion. But residents currently can only get preference points for moose and bighorn sheep, not the other species. Does it matter to you, to the breaker?
Mr. Chairman, I've contemplated that. I've actually, I want to kind of make this simple. If this motion goes through, I think we can hash out some of the details. I've even thought about a complimentary small game or preference point, you know, small game license or preference point, or something within one within a 5-year period. But I want to keep it simple right now and see if the motion passes. So.
Okay, and that's fine. Not to dice it to death. Any other? Go ahead, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Director Talbott or Mr. Rennie, I'm not certain. I thought you just told us that it was, preference point was 12 years. You had it for elk and deer and antelope at $31, $41, and $52. Am I confused by what you're telling me?
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, currently there are resident preference points only for moose and bighorn sheep. There are non-resident preference points for moose, bighorn sheep, deer, elk, and antelope. But residents at this point, there's no statutory provision to allow for preference points for those species.
Any other questions? All right, I'm calling for the vote on this motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign?
No.
All right, we better count hands. In favor? 4, 5, 6. I think it's a tie. Opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's a tie. Gotcha. Right. Okay. Well, try. Let's take a break and then Board of Outfitters, you betcha. Do you need work on this microphone?
All right.
All right.
You can have this one if you want.
All right, let's take a 5-minute break. All right, we're back in the saddle. This segment of this Travel, Recreation, and Wildlife and Cultural Resources Committee meeting is the Board of Outfitters. And we have with us Lee Livingston, board member of the Board of Outfitters, and Amanda McKee, the administrator of the Board of Outfitters. So you're on.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. We were supposed to be joined here by other board member, Mr. Terry Mackey, and I believe Senator Emmerich has a little bit of an update on why Mr. Mackey is not able to attend.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commission member Mackey had a little accident. He slipped in his laundry room and banged the back of his head. As Lee said, you hit him with a board on the head and you couldn't hurt him. But anyway, I guess it was a soft spot. He got a brain bleed in the back of his head at the top of the brainstem. He did brain surgery, removed a big percentage of the clot and sent him back to ICU. At which point the brain started swelling. They went back in, removed the patch from the back of the skull, and I think probably applied mannitol or something to reduce brain swelling. It appears right now, according to his daughter, to be successful. He is returning to his irascible self, but he is still in ICU and will be for, we don't know how long. But his health has not been restored, but he is getting back there. So our prayers and wishes go out to the family of Terry and everyone, but he is making grounds.
Chairman, would you like to speak to anything before they start about them you went to, or hold that for later? I thought you said you wanted to speak.
No, not really.
Okay. All right. Okay, proceed.
Chairman Allen, members of the committee, I'm here as a board member of the State Board of Outfitters. Just a clarification, in your notes, your packet, there were some meeting notes from a meeting in 2016 with State Director Rugwell of BLM that I attended and was part of. I attended that as a board member and president of Wyoming Outfitters and Guides Association, not as a state board member. I was appointed to the state board last year and said that in 2016 I was not. The issue that has been brought, we're wanting to visit with you about, has been brought to us by the industry on several occasions, clear back to 2003, in that we are operating under constraints of what areas we can authorize licensed outfitting in. And I'll give you just a real quick synopsis of what occurs with the Board of Outfitters. If a person desires to become an outfitter in the state of Wyoming, they need to approach the Board of Outfitters, and Amanda will correct me, certainly will correct me if I get this wrong, but they approach the Board of Outfitters with a license application. And there are several things they need to present. They need to present an operating plan. They need to present area authorization where they're proposing to operate. The land management agencies or private land will say, yes, if this individual receives their license, we will grant them permit to operate in these areas. So we might have an individual who comes in front of us who desires to become an antelope outfitter. They've got a ranch that they neighbor, or the ranch owner has agreed to lease to them. One of the requirements on their operating plan before they can become a licensed outfitter is 70 days of guiding experience, or what if the board determines other experience is satisfactory. They show on their operating plan that they have facilities to take care of these hunters, they have equipment to take care of these hunters, and if everything is in order, we look at that, we approve their license. Thinking that they've presented to us that they want to be a private land antelope outfitter, take maybe 10 hunters a year. What will occur and can occur and does occur on numerous occasions is when they have, this individual has this outfitting license, they then can go out and go to, in particular, the BLM and apply for supplemental areas. And they can apply across the state. They can be stationed in Casper, and they can apply for area authorization by Sundance. And the Board of Outfitters does not have the ability to approve or disapprove. We have to, basically, according to statute, we have to approve this supplemental area authorization. And the concern, I guess, coming from the industry is that you have individuals who might not be qualified to take more hunters, different areas. They don't have experience with this, and they've asked the Board of Outfitters to please, deny these requests. We can't. We're constrained by the statutes. In 2003, Board of Outfitters asked for an Attorney General's opinion on the statute. I think you have that in your packets. The Attorney General's opinion came down that we could not deny area authorization based upon his interpretation of the statute. So I guess what we've been asked by the industry is to come forward and ask for your help in maybe rectifying this situation.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston. I thought it was a little bit less the industry as it was the Board of Outfitters that was pulling their hair out, thinking that could you flesh that out for us? Because from the discussions I've had with several board members, not just you, but over the years, is that they feel that that they can't do a proper job in this regard because they have been told they don't have the statutory authority. The other thing that you and I talked about, when you read those outfitter statutes, and it talks about hunt area authorization and who makes that determination, I think the point that you brought up the other day was a good one. So if you could help the committee understand this, because I get it because I do it, but I don't think anybody else really does that level. So help us out, educate us.
Chairman Allen, members of the committee, to your first point, yes, it is the Board of Outfitters who have been pulling their hair out. It was brought forward to us by the industry, and it was industry concerns. That is one of our charges, is to not just regulate this industry, but to help foster this industry. And the board has felt that they are not able to do their job based upon the constraints they're operating under with current statutes. So yes, it's both. The board this has been something that has been brought forward in discussion from board members with outfitters for years, is we want to be able to do this, but we are not able to. To answer your second question, Chairman Allen, or your second point, that the statute, if you have it in front of you, it says the board may designate areas within the state as recommended by the Commission for Game Management purposes, in which licensee may conduct outfitting and professional guiding under the license. Attorney General Crank at the time, who's now Game Fish Commissioner, handed down a decision that said, since the Game and Fish Commission is not recommending areas, the board is not allowed to deny area authorization. And it's just my personal opinion on reading this. I'm not an attorney, but in reading this, I think that language was placed in there when they say designate areas within the state as recommended by the commission. And Director Talbott might be able to help me out on this, but when the Game and Fish commission recommends areas for game management, it's my understanding that those are areas that we see in your map when you open it up. Elk Area 55, Antelope Area 81. And I saw that, I read that as it allows the board to grant authorization in these numerical areas, which makes sense. It's a way of defining where the board can authorize a licensed outfitter to operate. But we are, an Attorney General's opinion was handed down, and as a board, we have to work within those constraints.
So what you're asking for, Mr. Livingston, is for board authority, statutory authority for the board to deny certain applications or supplemental area authorizations.
Or approve, or the ability to deny, approve, or disapprove.
So I think it would be helpful for the committee if you and Amanda would state what is the statutory makeup of the board and what is the purpose of the board?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the makeup of the board is 2 public at large members, 4 outfitter members, as well as game and fish personnel, and then the staff. Our mission is to ensure the safety of the public, also by licensing the outfitters and the guides in the industry and ensuring that they are operating under statute and under the board rule and regulation. In regards to the supplemental authority, each outfitter, as Lee stated, applies for areas that they propose they want to operate in. In the big scheme of things, nothing stops them from asking for additional areas. And in my time with the board, very rarely is an outfitter or new applicant denied use on any federal land, public land. And that's where it's become a huge issue for the industry. Oversaturation perhaps of outfitters with the number of tags, not to mention the public that is hunting at the same time. And so we're trying to somewhat make everyone happy and be able to ensure sound game management by our licensing principles as well.
Okay. Do you have anything else, or I'll open it up for committee questions?
Just one real quick thing, as far as something that we are charged with, the safety of the public, and that plays into what I was visiting about earlier, is when we grant a license to a first-time applicant, and based upon their operating plan and their experience that they provided for us, we feel that they are capable and able to go forward and outfit and safely guide these people, these clients, for this species under these circumstances. And an antelope hunt is a lot different in most cases than a wilderness elk hunt. You've got a whole different set of parameters that you're operating under. And so I guess it would be the board's desire to be able to have the authority to say, yes, I think this is this person demonstrates the ability and the knowledge and the experience to provide this type of hunt in this area. Go forward. It makes sense for this to occur. Or maybe not. Maybe you need to get more experience. Maybe this individual needs to work in this segment of the industry and gain the experience, enough experience where we feel that you are able to go forward and safely and effectively operate in these areas.
Just answer.
Okay. All right. Other questions or comments or questions from the committee? Can you give us an example of pulling your hair out as a board where you don't think you have the authority to deny additional area authorizations, but based on the evidence, the track record of the operator, all things considered, where you feel that some of those should be denied, but you don't have the authority? Can you help us understand this?
Chairman and all members of the committee, we've had Amanda, we've had several outfitter applicants that have applied for, again, like I was saying, a handful of BLM areas. And once they received their license, and I got to be careful on specific of them. I can't name numbers or names. I mean names especially, or license numbers. But once they've received their outfitter license, they've submitted supplemental area requests that have been approved by the Bureau of Land Management that come back to us, and it's been 50 areas. Probably.
Statewide.
Yeah, statewide. Where an example, my operation is I probably have 6 BLM areas that I'm authorized to operate in, and when you have someone that's based in the southwest corner of the state, applying for areas in blanket from there to the northeast corner of the state, it begs the question: do they have the experience? They have the ability to operate in all of those areas.
Okay. All right. If there's no other questions, then do you want to move on to your other part, the other component of your...
The other component, Mr. Chairman Allen and members of the committee, is the civil penalties. Not many boards, Pneumatic, pray help me here, how many boards have, in the state of Wyoming, licensing boards have the ability to assess civil penalties? The situations we encounter within the Board of Outfitters is late application for license. That's the most significant one. Is there's 340, we licensed 340 outfitters.
Currently, there's 327 outfitters.
327. You're required to submit your renewal application no later than December 31st. It needs to come in on December 31st. It's a late application on January 1. There were no teeth allowed or offered to us to fine or assess a civil penalty for someone that does not get their application in. And it turns into a problem because if you do not have your license, you cannot conduct your business. And on the surface, that seems like a simple thing. Well, if you don't have your license, you don't conduct your business. You don't. Too bad for you. Too bad for making a mistake. Too bad for being dumb. But it impacts the non-resident client greatly. We have folks that have been trying for years to get a license in Wyoming. They've been saving their money to go on this hunt. This is their dream hunt. Non-resident hunting is a big segment of Wyoming's economy, and all of a sudden their outfitter is not licensed. And when he's not licensed, that person cannot book with that outfitter. Everything has to come to a halt. And the only option that the board was offered is that we could treat a late applicant as a new applicant. And a new applicant for an outfitter license is an involved process. You have to come up with operating plan. You have to come up with all kinds of paperwork back to the area authorizations. You have to provide all of that stuff again, and it's not something that can happen in 2 or 3 days. So if an applicant is late, they are denied their license in January. Generally, it's going to be several months before they can come in front of the board and get their license. They have to go through testing again. And I have no problem with penalizing somebody for being late. It happens all the time. I mean, if you're an attorney, you're late the first time, I think there's a fine, a penalty assessed. You're late the third time, there's another penalty assessed. Or the second time, I believe the third time, you probably are going to have to go in front of the bar. But we are not allowed to do that as an outfitter. We've been informed by our council that we do not have the authority to assess penalties or fines. There was a bill that went through committee in 2005. I guess more than likely because it was a budget session, it was not considered. It passed out of the committee with unanimous support for allowing civil penalties for the outfitter board. But again, I'm only speculating that it was budget session. It's quite possible why it was not considered. We're asking if it would be possible for this legislation to be revisited to allow us to assess civil penalties.
Questions? Go ahead, Representative Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I guess when you talk about a potential bill here, and I was reading here as you were talking, so I'm trying to wrap my head around. You may have said this, I apologize if you did. You talked about the late fees and whatnot, and I agree. I think there needs to be some kind of mechanism where you guys can assess some kind of fees and things like that. Beyond late fees, though, what kind of civil penalties would you assess? I mean, there's if someone commits a misdemeanor or something, there is provisions in there that there's fines and whatnot that are assessed. But what kind of things outside of that would you all be looking to fine or kind of fees?
Chairman Allen, Representative. Go ahead. That's mainly it. That the late application fee, the incomplete or late. We're also required. I'll back up a little bit. We're also required as outfitters to submit a post-use report that details all the clients that we took for that year. These reports are due by the 31st of January. We have no way to say, I can choose not to submit my post-use report. And other than Amanda continually sending me emails and calling me, that's about all that's going to happen if I submit a late report or a false report. So that would be another instance where we would be asking for a civil penalty. And we, I guess I'm a simple man. I think if you're late, and you should pay the consequences. But we're just not able to ask the applicants or require the applicants to pay those consequences without going so far the other way that I think you're actually harming the industry rather than helping the industry.
Mr. Livingston, do you think that's, if this committee in the legislature gave you civil penalty authority to assess late fees for these, do you think that's enough of a deterrent? Because right now, you're operating without a license. You can't advertise starting January 1st of a new year if you don't have your outfitter license issued. So you're already in violation. If you do advertise, who's going to take their website down? Right? So would civil penalties fix this, in your opinion?
Chairman Allen, members of the committee, in visiting with the industry, I believe it would. I'll give you an example of this year. Out of the 327 licensed outfitters we had 13 late applicants, which was a large number, but that's a small percentage of the outfitted hunters. I mean, outfitters, licensed outfitters in the state of Wyoming. When you talk about them losing their license and not able to operate, that's pretty draconian, and it not only impacts the outfitter and their ability to make a livelihood. Again, it's their mistake; they should own up to it. But it's pretty severe. But it impacts the non-resident clientele that's wanting to come to Wyoming and hunt. Again, like I said, if they're booked with them, they're not. They cannot. And these guys. You're talking about folks who've been planning for years. You're talking about folks who may have had to put in there for their vacation as much as a year earlier. It just impacts. We as a board have felt it's impacting. It's more impactful than necessary.
Okay. Questions? Maybe. Representative Talbott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Livingston, can you give us any examples of comparable fines and penalties that other licensing boards impose? And how this would fit in?
Chairman Allen.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Representative Halverson. Amanda has gathered that information. Other states, outfitter boards do have that, and she could address that for you.
Thank you.
Chairman, Representative Halverson, I have spoke to the other boards of outfitters from Idaho, Montana, and Colorado. There are 3 of the bigger ones. Idaho has an extremely strict list of violations that they can fine for or get a civil penalty for. Anything from breach of contract in regards to their rules and regulations or their chapters. Montana, they have the same thing. It's a set monetary, no more than $500 for a violation of their rule. Colorado has like a first, a second, and a third strike. So your first, you're maybe warned, your second is a fine, and your third may be a suspension. So those states, that has worked for them. I have spoke with the Idaho investigator for the outfitters, and he has specifically said being able to give these fines and issue these citations has cut down on so many things in regards to breach of contract with other hunters, clients. Also, game and fish type violations. So the game and fish may cite this outfitter or guide. The outfitters board can do so on top of that if they choose to.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I wasn't speaking specifically about other state licensing boards. I'm talking about Wyoming licensing boards, like the Board of Nursing. How do you envision your penalties and fines being in line with theirs?
Sure. Many of the licensing boards in Wyoming, well, we all have the ability to set fees. Very few have the ability to fine. Yeah, and that's an issue for them as well. The State Board of Nursing has just recently changed their statutes, their rules. If you're late, you're late. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. The Board of Pharmacy has it listed as an administrative penalty through their statute. So they can issue a penalty administratively, whether it takes the office staff extra time to process late applications or some sort of violation of their licensure. The Cosmetology Board, they do have the fining authority of not more than a certain amount for any kind of violation of their act or their rule. So there's a few that do and most that don't. But they also look at it as we all have the authority to set fees. Yeah, do they put it in there?
Yep.
Okay. Representative Haley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions, and you answered half of one with the number of late applicants. I would assume that there's more late reports than there are late applicants. You know how many?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Haley, in regards to reports, the annual reports, we actually have an extended date for those. Those outfitter reports are not due until January 31st. That allows them to finish their complete season and submit those reports. This year there were no late reports. It was the renewals that we had concern with. And I think giving them that extra month to finish that report has helped with that.
Good. Follow up?
Another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on this, say you're granted this authority to assess a civil fine, who enforces that for you? Because you can't at this point go out and say you owe us X number of dollars. So what court or county attorney or who does the civil fines for you?
Amanda.
Yeah, Representative Haley, currently our board investigator, who is a peace officer, works in conjunction with the district courts, circuit courts, county courts, to make sure that any investigations that are done that have a penalty, it goes through the courts. That money goes through the counties, I'm sure, once it's paid.
Those are the civil penalties.
Right, and there are no.
That's what I'm asking, who would?
Our board investigator, as a peace officer, he would enforce those and do the citations.
Where would the money go if it were a civil penalty?
In regards to the other agencies or boards that have this, it's usually split. So there may be a portion that goes back into the board because we all work off of, we're only funded by license fees. We don't get any general fund money. And then a portion goes to school districts, other things within your county that you were cited.
Okay. Questions, committee? All right. Well, just stay there. Any comments from the public? Go ahead, name, rank, and serial number.
We need a microphone, Mr.
Yes, you
Chairman,
do.
for the record. Mr. Chairman, my name is Bud Betts, and I'm on the board of directors of the Wyoming Outfitter Guide Association. We stand in support of both measures. Perhaps they could be combined in one bill. On the first one, on the fining authority, it certainly gives them the flexibility, an array of sanctions, if you will, other than what they have already, which would be license revocation and then reapplication and all the tedium that goes with that resubmitting a plan. So I think that it's a very practical thing and needed for the board. On the may I comment, Mr. Chairman, on the area authorization?
Please do.
So that was the first issue, as you well know, committee, that we talked about, and we stand in support of that as well. And the reason for that is I think it's public friendly, even resident hunter friendly. It just allows the board to disperse outfitting in the state where it's appropriate. And instead of the federal agency that was called into question, which was given carte blanche era permits around the state, this gives the board the authority to not overload areas or regions or whatever it may be in the state with too much outfitter presence. So it's certainly appropriate there. And as an ex-legislator, if you look in 23.2.410 under general powers, and I think it's the 6th thing that's listed in the general powers, it's an ambiguous piece of legislation. It needs to be changed. And the 2 attorney general opinions that we've had were pretty explicit in that. It's something that you just can't act on. So that needs to be changed as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Questions for Mr. Betts? Anybody else from the public? Okay. All right. Committee, what's your pleasure? I'll move the bill. Is there a second?
Second.
It's moved to give them area authorization, approval, denial, specifically in statute and civil penalties, or I can split the motion. You want to each. I don't care.
Mr. Chairman, just, so there is this House Bill 202 from 2005 that addresses some of that. Are you suggesting that be redrafted? That really kind of addresses, I think, what you're getting at. That is what you want.
Yeah, all I'm really trying to, I don't care. I'm just trying to move something along here. I would happily withdraw that if you have a better idea. I really am okay with that. I haven't read this for a while. Actually, I do have an opinion. I don't know if I like this or not. I haven't really studied it enough to digest it. I would just like a committee builder out and see where it goes. So I would combine the 2, authority to, if that's your, it should be, an authority for civil penalty, authority, and area authorization. And those are hunt area authorizations. They're not just like the lander area, but actual game and fish, hunt area authorization, approval and denial, authority expressly statute. That's my motion. First section. It's been moved and seconded. Committee comments before we vote. And these can be, to move a bill draft forward, all we need is a voice vote. We don't need roll calls yet. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question for our legal counsel. Is that violate the single subject provision, or can we combine it all in the bill?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clem, we need to explore that a little further. I mean, both certainly fall under, amendments to the Board of Outfitters authority. That would be one way to look at it. Certainly the other side of it is that, there are 2, within that there's two topics.
And that was my question too, Representative Clem, is should this be two bills or one? And I don't care either way. If LSO wants to start, if we vote to approve, if the LSO wants to start this, and then we'll take your advice as we go forward in the August meeting, I'm okay with that.
Mr. Chairman, I'm supportive of your motion. I just think it would be probably better two separate bills. But I'm supportive of the idea.
Yeah. All right, I'll just change it. It's easy enough to do. Two bills. Is there still a second? Second. Okay. All right, committee, what's your pleasure? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's been moved and seconded to start two bill drafts on that one. Thank you.
Committee, thank you.
You bet. And I'm going to have Game and Fish do an update now, and that's on the agenda. And then there's public comment at the end, and you can comment on anything that we've discussed today. And even if we didn't. Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, on the next agenda item is updates from the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And I have Deputy Director John Kennedy, and I have asked him to provide an update to the committee on our budget and financing. And I have also asked our Communications Director, Mr. McKee, to provide the committee an update and overview of our strategic planning and public response process that we have underway at that time. If we have time at the end of that, Mr. Chairman, I have some information to provide an update on our proposed grizzly bear seasons and we take questions or comments from the committee. So with that, I would turn it over to Mr. King.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'll cover the first general update, as Director Talbott said, and give you an update on our fiscal year 18 budget. Backing up a little bit before I go into that budget, our current budget, a reminder that during the 2017 legislative session, you'll recall that general fund support for the 5 main programs that the Commission administered that have been generally funded since 2006 was eliminated. That was for AIS, sensitive species, sage grouse, veterinary services, and our wolf management program. That was about $5.8 million per year to administer those programs. And pursuant to that, and along the same lines as that, a bill, license fee bill went through, increase in certain license fees to generate about $5.8 million to offset that impact and loss of general fund support to the Commission. And in fact, the 2018 budget bill did not include general fund support for those 5 programs either. So the funding to support those programs has been incorporated into the Commission's budget from the Game and Fish Operating Fund, and with no general fund capital construction funding coming to the Commission's allocated Game and Fish funding for certain high priority capital construction projects as well, and I'll summarize that in just a minute. So the model, the approach, if you will, with the Commission is similar to general fund, other than it's an annual budget process now, strictly annual, no more biennial budgeting for the Game and Fish Commission at this time. We do have a standard budget, an exception request budget model similar to the general fund with our Commission, and that exception request process, if you will, is to cover some one-time funding like some capital construction projects that our Commission is funding right now. So the Commission's fiscal year 18 budget is just under $82 million as a standard budget, with funding, of course, to support the 5 programs that we talked about a little bit ago. And Game and Fish funding was allocated for some high priority capital construction projects that are in the exception one-time spending budget. As always, the Commission's budget was presented to the public and the Commission twice, a couple more times to our Commission, an internal working group with our Commission, but formally through a public process twice, once in March and once in July. And pursuant to specific statutory language, our budget is presented to the Joint Appropriations Committee, and that was done in January. We're currently in the process of finalizing the Commission's FY19 budget, which is pretty close to flat with the FY18 budget. And again, that budget will be presented to the commission and to the public and the Joint Appropriations Committee this coming year as well. So our funding model has returned to the way it was prior to 2006. With respect to that funding model, almost 90% of the commission's budget is now supported by hunters and anglers. Of that funding, approximately 50% is from license fees. That's about $34 million. Approximately 30% of that funding is from federal programs, primarily the wildlife and sport fish restoration programs administered through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and that makes up about $25 million of the Commission's total budget. The sport fish and wildlife restoration programs receive some attention. Those federal programs, you often hear of Pittman-Robertson or PR dollars, and Dingle-Johnson DJ dollars, which are from the sport fish side of things, but specific to the Pittman-Robertson Act, which is excise taxes on certain hunting and sporting equipment. The DJ or Dingle-Johnson is excise taxes on certain fishing tackle equipment. That funding is distributed to the state fish and wildlife agencies through a formula that's based on land and water area and the number of paid hunting and fishing license holders in each state. And then we provide a matching of a share of up to 25%. It's important to note that this money does not come directly to the department or the commission. We don't have a pot of PR dollars or a pot of gun money, as some folks have referenced, but rather we're reimbursed for eligible projects. And eligible projects for PR funding include wildlife restoration, habitat restoration, wildlife research, acquisition of habitat and access, operation and maintenance of our facilities, hunter education and shooting ranges. Moving into some of the capital construction projects right now, we've talked about the Commission's operating fund, and that's been in place since 1937. For a variety of reasons, that operating fund is large enough to support those programs that were previously funded through the general fund, and fortunately, that operating fund is large enough to accomplish some high priority capital construction projects. That's certainly, as you know, important given the state's economy and the lack of general fund support coming to the commission right now. Thankfully, we have some capacity to invest in some of our buildings and our facilities. Background and history, I've talked to this committee before about the status of that commission operating fund and why it's in the shape that it is right now. That is because of budget reductions that were implemented by Director Talbott back in 2013 and 14, and we worked a lot on that at this time with this committee. Those were serious budget reductions that were made in 2013 and 14 and moving into the FY15 year. Right at the same time that we were moving forward with those budget reductions, we received some unanticipated revenue from fishing licenses that we weren't expecting, and we certainly saw high levels, unprecedented levels of that Pittman-Robertson funding come to the states and to Wyoming because of sale of firearms, because of some national events that occurred. So during the last 2 years, our commissions allocated some of that money to some of the high priority capital construction projects, some habitat improvement work, and some wildlife research. And that includes big game migration corridor work, mule deer initiative work, big game research projects, improvements and upgrades to the Commission's conservation camp at Du Bois, and construction of a new game and fish and regional office building in Laramie. The new game and fish lab and regional office in Laramie has received a lot of attention, so I thought, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, I'll go into some detail about that. Yes, please do. That game and fish building in Laramie that's completed, by the way, was one of our highest capital construction priorities for many years, and it came to the legislature originally as a proposed capital construction project and was actually removed and eliminated and not funded. However, in 2014, the Joint Appropriations Committee added $3 million to the Commission's budget to purchase an existing building in Laramie for our lab. That was included in the final budget that year from through the legislature. The Commission did, in fact, move forward and purchase that building in Laramie in 2014, but because of some partnership and some opportunities to support other entities in Laramie, a partnership with the City of Laramie, Laramie Economic Development, and Wyoming Business Council, we agreed to sell that building because of it was better suited for a different company. And so in fact, with legislative approval, we did sell that building and had direction that was provided to us in 2015 from the legislature to use the revenue from selling that building for our game and fish laboratory, wildlife forensic and fish pathology lab in Laramie.
To get your full money out of it?
We did.
And then some, or just straight across?
Straight across, straight across. At that time, Mr. Chairman, I will mention though, in 2015, when we took this back to the Joint Appropriations Committee, one opportunity that arose was to not only move forward with this partnership with Laramie, but to also address one of our other high priority capital construction projects, which is our regional office in Laramie. So at that time, when we had that discussion with the Joint Appropriations Committee in 2015, we in fact got approval to expand this whole project to not only be wildlife forensic and fish pathology lab, but a joint, if you will, building with our game and fish regional office personnel. And so that was a really, really neat opportunity that was supported by the Joint Appropriations Committee and this committee as well, that we very much appreciate. The total square footage of that building is 45,000 square feet. Approximately 19,800 of that are for the lab and 16,500 for the regional office. And then we have a shop that's about 8,500 square feet. Again, I mentioned earlier that that building's been constructed. We'd be more than happy to take any member of this committee for a tour of that. Just let us know, or just stop by and take a look at it at your convenience. So we'd certainly like to invite you to do that with us.
It sounds like you listened to the management council discussion, didn't you?
I
possibly
did not listen to management council.
I'm curious. That came up.
Okay. Let's see, where am I at? Total cost of the project is about $16.8 million. We're still looking at reducing that actually, because we're going to be getting reimbursed for a portion of that from, it's an eligible project for that Pittman Robertson dollars that I mentioned earlier. And we're hoping to get about $4.4 million reimbursed from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through that program. So that we're looking at, if you look at the proceeds for selling the building, $3 million legislative dollars, general fund about $9.5 million, commission operating fund monies.
Go ahead, Senator Moniz.
Thank you. What is your plans or your agreement to do with the old regional office?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Senator, the old building actually was exchanged to Laramie Economic Development. So we exchanged, we're building our building on a new property. That was theirs. We exchanged straight across, and they now have ownership of the land and the building, the old Game and Fish building. We got property to the south on Adams Street that they owned. So we no longer own that property or the building.
So yes. So you exchanged the building and the property for the property?
We did. Property that's much, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead.
Senator, a property that's much larger, actually, a little bit larger than our existing property, and much better located for the public.
Actually, Representative Haley and I have toured the facility. It's quite some Chairman, I would recommend also that in the future we schedule a meeting there. They have a really nice meeting.
Sure.
But if you haven't had an opportunity to tour it, it's been nice.
Okay, good to know. Go ahead, Mr. Kennedy.
And Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, our July commission meeting will be held at Laramie, at that building, and that would be a great time to come by and not only hear the commission and some of the public and department employees, but to look at the building at that time. We're going to be having a tour.
Okay.
In summary, just a final comment regarding our funding and budgets. Although the commission's operating fund is strong at this time, our primary sources of revenue, that is hunting and fishing licenses, excise taxes on fishing and hunting equipment, in particular firearm sales right now, are uncertain and very hard for our commission to predict, obviously. There's so many factors that are outside of our control that impact those sources of funding, like harsh winters, wildlife diseases, habitat condition, the demand for firearms. And that's why our work for additional secure, consistent, stable funding for wildlife management continues to be a high priority for our commission and department. With that, that's our funding and budget update for you, and we'd be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Chairman Emmerich, go ahead.
Mr. County, could you perhaps discuss your cooperation with the Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resources Trust Fund and how you support rehabilitation?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, actually, it's a pleasure to visit about that for a moment. And we have had a long-standing, very positive relationship with the WWNRT, and our personnel submit a number of wildlife habitat enhancement projects to that board each and every year. And we have had, like I said, an excellent working relationship with that and have accomplished some wonderful projects for wildlife in the state of Wyoming.
Thank you very much.
Who has their hand up? Representative Clint, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I have a couple of questions. First of all, just more of a request. When you do finish your, or you get close to finishing your annual budget, is there a way you can send me a link, or I don't know if the rest of the committee would like that, or a link to that budget? I'd just like to see it. What we see in the legislature, I think our budget is not obviously what you guys see. So I'd like to see that if possible. And then also, I appreciate you, I was jotting down the list of revenues and kind of the breakdown and all that kind of stuff, but I wonder if there's a document, I don't want to put more work on it, but just to see kind of a list of those revenues, maybe over the last couple of years or something, that we kind of see and track. And then the other question that I have is, as far as the Pittman Robertson dollars, you said there's not a pot of money, but, and I just want to be clear on this, but that you do projects and you're reimbursed those Pittman Robertson dollars. I'm kind of confused because I heard that we had an influx of Pittman Robertson dollars. I guess I'm just kind of some clarification on how that all works.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman. Representative, so three good issues, three good questions. And you're right about that budget in terms of what this committee sees, because our budget is, as you know, annually presented the commission's budget to the Joint Appropriations Committee. We have tried in the past to present it to this committee. We'd be more than happy to do that too, if you'd like us to present it in detail like we do to JAC. But we'll definitely get you that link. And that budget, the commission budget for FY19, will be approved at that July commission meeting as well. But we'll get you the link and the information to give you that budget, or just call me direct if there's problems. In terms of that breakdown in revenue, same applies. We'd be happy to get you that. We'll send that to LSO, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay, and we'll get it out to the committee.
Absolutely, and actually this segues into a whole nother arena, sort of. Okay, go ahead, Representative Halverson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, were you done?
Mr. Chairman, excuse me, Representative, just one other issue on the Pittman Robertson funding. That's correct. There's not a pot. That money does not come straight from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to the Game and Fish Commission. It's an amount available to us if we have eligible projects, which we do, to take advantage of that increased funding right now. And we intend to try to spend every bit of that.
Representative Halverson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At one point, we heard that the department was going to come to the general fund for health increase expenses, the cost of health care. Is that not going to happen, or is the commission budget sufficient to cover that?
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, several years ago, I'm going to say about 6 years ago, Travel, Recreation, and Wildlife Committee, when we were getting general funds, actually drafted a bill to direct the commission to request both grizzly bear, funding for grizzly bears, an endangered species, listed species, and health care for our employees from the general fund. You repealed that legislation during the last legislative session. So we are no longer under that edict from the legislature to request those fundings. We never did receive any funding whatsoever from either two of those requests, but the legislation simply said that we had to request those dollars. And so you will not see that request in the future.
So that was just a rumor.
So during the last session, when we got to the end and we had our legislative interim topic discussion, one of the points that came up was budget. And so I would like to turn this over to Representative Flintner and for a little more discussion, and we'll have a committee discussion. Go ahead, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My personal request for an interim topic was that we as committee be allowed to review those agency budgets that fell within our purview as committee, because I just felt as a new legislator, when I got to the budget session, all that work had been done by JAC in the 2 months previous. And I know that I am perfectly capable of going to the website and looking up that information. But for me personally, it would be nice, I feel, as a committee, if those budgets could be presented to us for our review, and we might be able to flesh something out rather, that JAC might miss. It was just in an effort to have a better understanding of the budgets, and also to maybe find some efficiencies as a committee that might have been missed when it got to JAC. So it speaks directly to what Representative Clem was just asking for, and certainly Mr. Kennedy has said that he could provide that to us, but that was what was behind that request for me personally, and so I'll pass it on to anybody else if they have any other comments.
And let me follow up on that, and that is that we did approve that on the House side. I don't remember how we did it with the joint, but there was no pushback on that, and then it came up during Management Council, as a matter of fact. And so, I personally, as the chairman and as a member of this committee, I would like to have a deeper understanding of the budgetary process. I understand the commission has that statutory authority, and that's all well and good. But I'd like to have a better understanding of not only your agency, but also tourism and state parks. And as a matter of fact, in some states, the committee that is assigned to that agency does that. They don't have appropriations, or the appropriations does less. And so this is how Wyoming does it. But I think personally, I would like to see more of that information. Other thoughts? And so you can do that. You can get that stuff to us and help us learn, right?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I guess the only thing that I would add to that is that our budgeting process is, I would say, probably more complicated than others because of all of our funding sources and also our expenditures. And we can certainly provide you all the information that you would like on the budget, but I guess I would suggest to the committee that it may be beneficial to have Deputy Director Kennedy and our CFO Meredith would present that information to you so that you could interact with that and maybe more fully understand our process and how it works.
How about at the August meeting, because you'll have it by then, and could you bring that to us?
Mr. Chairman, certainly.
Let's do that. Okay, and LSO made a note of that? Okay, great. Any other questions of the department from the committee? Senator Moniz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to the building in Laramie, at the new building. You said the legislature assigned you $3 million. I'm gathering you had another $16 million to finish off that building. Where did that money come from to finish the building?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead,
Senator. The rest of the revenue, the rest of the funding for that building came from out of the Game and Fish Commission operating fund. So the Game and Fish budget, and as mentioned, some of those costs are reimbursable for facilities through the Pittman-Robertson Act, and we hope to get $4 to $5 million back so that we don't have to spend all that money from the operating fund.
Well, Senator. So you did have $16 million available to you to pay that building off, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman. That is correct, and that capacity in that commission operating fund was due to that history I provided of budget reduction work and reorganization that took place in 2013, 14, and a little bit in 2015, and then unanticipated revenues from fishing license sales and Pittman Robertson, the sale of firearms went through the road.
Thank you.
Follow up. Thank you. Okay. Anything else from the committee? All right. Oh, ready.
Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, we do have a quick update on our public engagement strategic
Oh, yeah.
planning process.
Go ahead.
Communications Director, Randy McKee.
Mr. Chairman, this is a follow-up in November in Cheyenne at your meeting. Would let you know that we were starting work at that point, and Mr. Lance from the governor's the governor's Fish and Wildlife Task Force was there as well to talk about how this was a recommendation from that task force and came out of the program review that you've all heard about, and that looked at 12 game and fish programs, and the biggest recommendation was to set priorities with more feedback from the public. So I've got some results from that. That survey, we did a very comprehensive approach to gathering input, some of it scientific data done through surveys, and others what we call qualitative data through public meetings and focus groups and an online forum as well. So I can take you through some of those results if you'd like, but the biggest thing for you to all know is that this was that big push that the director has wanted to have since he's been around, and that we also heard from the governor's task force in that program review to try to set some priorities and base those on what the public would like us to do.
Let me stop you right there. Do you have a hard copy for us?
Mr. Chairman, I provided a link to it. It's on our website, to LSO. So they've got that. It's 500 pages. So this is it right here.
Yeah. So you're going to give us the executive summary.
This is very much the executive summary.
Let me ask you one more question. I tried to engage in that, and there were so many hateful comments, I just quit. And so I hope that you have the time, the skill, the patience to sort through that stuff and determine what the public really thinks and wants.
Mr. Chairman,
there were some hateful comments on there.
Mr. Chairman, I think you're referencing the online forum, correct?
But that's part and parcel of it, isn't it?
Correct. That was one component of it. But an online forum is very much what the social scientists call qualitative data. So it does not necessarily represent what everyone thinks. And so we tried to do a telephone survey to really get at what the people of Wyoming think about wildlife management. So that telephone survey was 2,500 individuals, residents. Representative Clem earlier had asked about the survey we're doing on new technology. This one was not just hunters or anglers. It was the company that did this for us has great experience in doing the survey, and especially around wildlife management. But what they wanted to do as well is to make sure there was representation from all different parts of Wyoming, and that the survey was done in as scientifically sound a manner as possible. So got some great results there. And I think some of it might be of interest to you too as you go through some discussions about outdoor recreation, because we asked residents about what they participate in. And one of the remarkable things we found out is that 50% of Wyoming residents reported that they bought a hunting or a fishing license in the last 5 years. So it was 48% angling, 30% hunting, and 2% trapping. But that kind of participation in hunting and fishing and trapping is very high compared to the national averages. We also asked some other questions about some other activities. So these are Wyoming residents. 65% said they've been wildlife viewing in the last 5 years, 72% hiking, 67% camping, 32% motorboating, 21% kayaking or canoeing. So again, very high participation in all of those activities outdoors that have some interaction with wildlife, so kind of somewhat wildlife-based recreation or other outdoor recreation. So it was, I think, very valuable to get that kind of information. And then you can look at the survey results too to kind of get some different levels of satisfaction with and priorities from those different user groups.
This is really helpful information. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that we did during this session is we asked the departments, yours included, to share this information and coordinate this information. And that's actually the first step or the first agenda item in the morning, is to have all the agencies in the room at the same time so that we can address this together in a coordinated manner, so that we can, as a committee and as part of the legislature, is to understand the scope of outdoor recreation and what that means. That information that you have is valuable, and is by sharing this information with the other agencies and with this body, it will no longer be siloed. And that is my goal, is to determine what that scope is and then see if we can enhance outdoor recreation, or at least we can't start that until we understand what it is. And so make sure that that information that you just gave us is shared with us and with these other agencies, please.
Again, Mr. Chairman, the LSO already has a link to it from our website, and all the other agencies have it as well. So it's big, so it's hard to wrap your arms around. There's many different components to it. It's if you get into the 500-page version of it, or 465, I believe. It's broken down by the telephone survey of residents. We also interviewed through the survey non-resident hunters and anglers to particularly get their opinions, given they are one of the customers we serve.
I think we need the broad strokes. I don't think we need 500 pages.
Well, it's just available to you if you'd like it. At the beginning of that, Mr. Chairman, there is an executive summary that's about 35 pages long.
And I'd like one that's even briefer than that. Just exactly what you just said, those numbers, the percentages, and that activity. So go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if you'd like, then as a request, I can try to pull some of that data out. And then anybody who'd like further information, I can be a person who tries to dive into the data for you to find other results from this.
The high level view is what would be most useful to us. It would also be the most likely to be read and remembered.
I understand. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you.
Would you like any other highlights or
yeah, if we have time, another 5 or 10 at the very most, would that work?
Sure. One thing the survey asked Wyoming residents was about their priorities for the game and fish functions. So kind of broke it down because there's a lot of different functions, but picked out 27 of top level functions. And the top rankings that the Wyoming residents said that they believe were the most important were protecting fish and wildlife by enforcing wildlife and fishing laws and regulations. That was most important. The second most important was protecting Wyoming waters from aquatic invasive species. The third was maintaining wildlife habitat management areas. Fourth was managing species that are hunted. Fifth was providing hunter education. And sixth was improving, it was tied with the other two there, was improving and maintaining quality fish and wildlife habitats. So a very big emphasis from Wyoming residents on the importance of that protection part of it through laws and through programs like aquatic invasive species, wildlife habitat management areas, hunter education, and then the importance of managing those species that are hunted and habitats. We also did ask too, so it's in there if you'd like it, about what the public thought about how we were performing in those at those functions. So that result came through.
Do tell.
Fortunately, it was positive. Residents of Wyoming did definitely feel like Game and Fish was performing quite well. There were some areas where there was some differences between how important they viewed a function and how we were performing at that. An example of that was the management and maintenance of the wildlife habitat management areas. And so definitely feel like we got some positive results, but also really did give us some direction and some things we can do better. And so really, I guess that's the big part of this too, is that we're taking this input to try to shape a strategic plan for the next 5 years. So that will be based on these results, and also, of course, science and the biology of making sure that the wildlife are well managed. So it's a combination of those two things to try to make sure our agency functions as well as possible and meets the expectations and priorities of the public.
Very good. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, a couple other things of note, as Mr. Kennedy mentioned, there was a fee increase passed in 2017 that just went into effect on January 1st for especially non-resident hunters. But 78% of Wyoming residents strongly or moderately agree that elected officials should explore new options for funding. So given that you've just done that, I think that tells you that there's strong support for that action to make sure that wildlife is conserved and protected, as we heard about what was important to them. We also did public meetings, focus groups, the online forum, an employee survey, and so through those two, there was a little bit more detail where people could expand on why they felt strongly about a matter. And so it was in those discussions too where we gained some good insight, for instance, on access. I'm sure you all hear about hunting and fishing access and how important it is to those customers of ours. And there's a feeling that there have been some good strides on that, but that we can always work more to provide more access. And that we were able to really understand that through those focus groups and public meetings. And then also, as you mentioned, there was a diversity of views that came through in this, and because we were able to take input from those, we were able to hear a lot of different perspectives. So, generally Wyoming residents at those public meetings and focus groups supported a grizzly bear hunting season. We're also able to hear from some groups that were opposed to that. The Jackson meeting brought an opposing view to grizzly bear hunting, and so you can also see that in the online forum. So it was a means to hear a lot of different perspectives and get some more information on that. Another area that we covered was boating safety, since Game and Fish is responsible for law enforcement and boating issues, boating registration. So heard from those folks about how important the Aquatic Invasive Species Program is, but also how important access is and education around etiquette on Wyoming's waters. So some good suggestions and some in-depth perspectives on where we can go into the future. So that's the thumbnail sketch of 500 pages, and definitely up to help provide any more information from the results of this. We should have a strategic plan out to the public probably around July 1st, and our commission would be set to approve that strategic plan at its September meeting in due course.
Very good, thank you. Committee, questions, comments? Okay, then do you want to move right into the grizzly bear season discussion?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, can certainly do that. I might just add one thing to what Rennie had to say, and certainly it was a goal of the department and my goal in the strategic planning and public outreach to more understand the alignment between the department and the public. And the last time we, as an agency, did something even similar to this was clear back in the 1990s. And at that time, we heard very loudly from the public on 4 different issues. And the first one was law enforcement. They wanted more law enforcement for the protection of our wildlife resources. Access was a significant issue, as well was habitat and information. And in the late 90s, we made some pretty significant changes to the agency. We implemented the Access Yes program. We changed our structure and eliminated some damage warden positions and created new game warden districts as a result of that, and augmented our investigative unit as well. In addition to that, we consolidated our habitat units and also put a regional I&E person in each one of our regions to provide more information to the public. So as we move through this process and present this information to the public and develop a new strategic plan, hopefully we can make sure that we're aligned with the wants and desires of the Wyoming public as we move forward.
Good.
So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will give you a 30,000 foot view of grizzly bears. We're planning to have a grizzly bear season. Is there any questions?
That's more like 130,000. I actually have a map I would like to pass it down the way this is available on the Game and Fish website. But if you look at this, the dark orange color, I'm going to pass it down. I want you to look at this area down here, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it. I submitted my comments before the deadline, which was April 30th, I guess, to the commission. And I suggested that they remove the southern little teardrop of Area 5, I believe, and have that just be an open season, whether or not that happens. But my rationale for that is that it was never in the original grizzly bear recovery area that was agreed to by the interagency grizzly people when we first started this program way back in the 70s. The grizzly bear was, how long has it been listed on the endangered species list?
Sure, since 1975.
That's what I thought. So 43 years. And so what that has meant is a whole restructuring of the way we do things. New regulations, new management schemes, a huge amount of money spent by the department and by the state of Wyoming to recover the bear. In my opinion, they're over-recovered. There's far more than we need to meet those endangered species delisting criteria. And certainly this area that I would like to see removed from that map, that hunting area map, is an outlier. It's so far from the core area of the recovery, the heart of the recovery area. I see no reason to have that be managed as grizzly habitat. And so, but for whatever that's worth, that's my 2 bits on this, and certainly my input as a citizen of the state doesn't carry any more weight than anybody else's. But I just threw that out there to get the discussion going, if there is one.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, if I may, I provide some background on where Wyoming's at with grizzly bear management and the status of that population. As the good chairman mentioned, grizzly bears were listed in Wyoming in the early mid-1970s. And since that time, the state of Wyoming, in conjunction with the state of Idaho and Montana, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have worked very diligently to recover the Yellowstone grizzly bear population. Those recovery criteria are based on 3 separate issues. One is maintaining a population of at least 500 animals with genetic diversity, ensuring that 16 of 18 bear management units are occupied by reproducing females with cubs of the year, and establishing and adhering to mortality thresholds for the entire population. Since 1975, the Wyoming Game and Fish Department has led grizzly bear recovery, manages all conflicts, and provides for the collection and analysis of all information as far as grizzly bear populations in the Wyoming segment of the Yellowstone ecosystem, which consists of about 75% of the occupied habitat in the ecosystem. In doing that, we have invested nearly $15 million to date in the management of this species. And obviously, they have exceeded the recovery criteria. They have done so since 2003. They were briefly delisted in I believe 2007, and then they were relisted. And we have been working. There's several entities. The IGBC, which is the 30,000-foot view, the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee, and underneath of that committee is the Yellowstone Ecosystem Subcommittee. Myself and Brian Nesvik have served on, I served on the IGBC for many years, and Brian served on the Yellowstone Ecosystem Subcommittee and chaired that as well for several years. And so Wyoming has an approved plan through the service, and we have gone through that. And currently, the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission is in the process of proposing a hunting season on grizzly bears in the Yellowstone ecosystem. I can run through that regulation very briefly with you, but in order to make sure that we were aligned with the public, last November, we went out and we held public meetings in several communities around the state, and we asked the public, what are the issues of grizzly bear management? And we came up with 5 main themes from the public. One was management and monitoring, one was research, information and education, conflict management, and the management as far as hunting seasons goes. And we went out, visited with the public, and then we used that input to move forward with a proposed hunting season. And the proposed hunting season will be presented to the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission on May 23rd in Lander, Wyoming at 10 o'clock in the morning. And we would certainly welcome you to attend that. All of our commission meetings are webcast, very similar to this meeting, and we have been doing that for a number of years. So if you would like to join via the World Wide Web and sit in on that meeting, we would certainly appreciate that as well. Currently, the proposal for hunting seasons, based on public information, based on public input and recent information that we received, we're proposing to have a female mortality quota within the DMA, which is that area that Chairman Allen shared with you, that dark area, of 1 female bear and up to 10 male bears. In addition to that, we propose to issue have a quota of 12 licenses outside of the DMA to manage those bears outside of the DMA. There are several provisions in the regulation as far as reporting any individual that is successful in drawing a license, and there's been some pretty significant concerns about the issuance of licenses. So our proposal that we will be presenting to the commission will be a system very similar to what the department utilized for the bison hunt in Jackson when we started that. Individuals will apply, they will receive a number. Once they receive a number, they will have 10 days to produce a hunter safety card and also purchase a license. Once those individuals purchase a license, they will be provided 10 days in which they'll have the opportunity to harvest a grizzly bear. They will be required under the regulation to take an electronic device with them, a spot device, a satellite phone, something like that, that they can report in should they be successful in the harvest of a grizzly bear. The females with cubs inside or cubs of the year will not be eligible for harvest under the regulation, and there are several other parameters that we have set forth in the regulations, such as the use of baiting, the use of traps and snares, radio telemetry, and those types of issues as far as the proposed regulation. Again, this regulation will be, we have sought public input on it, and we will be presenting it to the commission on May 23rd in Lander to have them review the regulation, and at that time, additional public input will be taken in Lander. And Mr. Co-Chairman, now Mr. Chairman, if you have any questions on the proposed grizzly bear regulation, I would certainly do my best to answer them.
One question, Director. How many licenses total do you anticipate issuing?
Mr. Chairman, that will depend. Certainly in the DMA, we'll have a mortality threshold of 1 female. And should that bear, we will have a mandatory bear ID. We also meet with the individuals who are successful in securing these licenses. And should the first bear harvested be a female, that will be the end of the season. If those individuals who are successful in obtaining those licenses harvest male bears, we could issue up to 10 licenses.
My point, thank you, Mr. Director. My point being here, how many licenses could be issued as opposed to the number of bears eliminated because of conflict?
Mr. Chairman, that varies from year to year. And when I say that, I am referring to the number of bears that are eliminated from conflict each year. I would say that number probably averages somewhere between 8 and a dozen bears each year. However, there are years when there is more mortality documented in the system, when whether that be agency take or highway mortalities or whatever. But assuming that that average be 8 to 10, that would be about the number of licenses that would be issued within the DMA. And we're certainly going to do our best to target nuisance bearers to help us in our management of those areas.
Questions for the, go ahead.
Chairman, Director Talbott, how many of these licenses are going to be non-resident, and how many will be resident, or will they all be resident?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Senator, Wyoming statute requires a 75-25 split on resident, non-resident licenses for grizzly bears. So the first 3 licenses that will be issued to residents. The 4th license will be issued to a non-resident, and we'll follow that pattern to meet the statutory requirement of 75-25.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead.
What are the prices of those licenses?
Go ahead, Director. Mr. Chairman, Senator, in accordance with statute, resident grizzly bear license is $600 and non-resident grizzly bear license is $6,000.
One more question.
Go ahead.
And has there been any possibility of these bears that are in conflict that have resident or non-resident hunters be ready within 24 hours to come up instead of having a game of fish or somebody, other person shoot those, have a regular citizen be able to get a bear that way instead of just disposing of them?
Director. Mr. Chairman, Senator, yeah, we have visited about that. That provision is not in our regulation at this time. That's something that we may explore in more detail in the future. Certainly that would require quite a different structure as far as the season, but certainly the management of conflicts is one of our primary goals.
Senator Anselmi. Dalton, did you have a question?
No.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, I do. And that another issue that has come up, just for the committee's knowledge, is credit card processing fees. And so right now, all licenses other than over the counter have to be paid for with a credit card. And it's those, if you apply for a license in a limited quota area, you have to do that online and pay for it with a credit card. What that has done is it has added quite a financial burden to the department. So could you speak to that, gentlemen? What that amount is? Because I'm going somewhere with this conversation.
And Mr. Chairman, you are correct. And right now, the department has moved toward electronic licensing and electronic applications. And when we do require an individual to pay for a license up front, we have to pay a 2.5% credit card fee. That amount right now is about $1.6 million a year. We have looked at several different options on how we can go about that. One of them would be very similar to this, is that you have an application for a position on the list. That does not require an individual to purchase a license and send that in. And another option that we have talked about is that an individual only applies for a license and does not purchase that license until they're successful in the draw. And there has been concern about approaching it from that manner, and that there may be a lot of people that apply for licenses that aren't necessarily serious about hunting. Should we do something like that, that would save us nearly $1 million a year. I believe that would save us about $982,000 each year as a result of people only paying for that. Just a little bit of background information on that. And in the old days, when we took paper applications, an individual issued a check to the department. We processed that application, and then we don't issue checks. All of our checks are issued through the state auditor's office. And so in that process, from start to finish, it was just shy of about $20 to to process that whole thing, from us cashing the check, putting the check in the bank, transferring the money to the auditor's office, and then having the auditor issue a check and mail it to the individual. So it was very expensive, and that was one of the reasons that we moved away from that option. Currently, the commission has asked us to look into that, and we're once again taking public input on that. Statute allows us to pass those credit card fees on to the person who applies for the license. So we could apply that to each applicant as well. So when you apply, if you use a credit card, you would pay 2.5% to reimburse that credit card holder. So there's a lot of options there. We've looked into them, and would certainly take any questions that you or other members of the committee may have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Director. The other aspect of that is right now, by statute, we all pay a $14 per species application fee. And I think originally that was meant to offset some of that $20 transaction cost. And so now that's underwater, but in a way it's not, because we have the credit card processing fees. So that's all in play, that's all in flux. But how this relates back to the former discussion is that I'm trying to figure out why, and I understand, I get that, but there is some concern, as the director pointed out, that especially on these high dollar license fees, like a $6,000 fee, that there could be some people who don't necessarily advocate to hunt that species, and that they could tie up those licenses just with it would be cheaper than litigation, quite frankly. And so if they had to pay their credit card processing fee, that might be an additional deterrent to something to think about. Because if we're going to do this as a state, if we're going to actually hunt these species, I want legitimate hunters in the field that are serious about it, or serious about the opportunity, not the antis. That's all. Representative Drew. Go ahead.
Director Talbott, could you give me those numbers again? The total number, and then the number of the fee, the credit card fees you generate for your.
That's Mr. Chairman, Representative, absolutely. Right now, the total credit card fee is just over $1.5 million, $1,509,168. And if we changed around the other figure, just shy of $1 million, that's $952,880. I had a number transposed there. And so it costs us $1.5 million basically to do that. And there are other options. We can either pass that on to our customers or change the draw.
Just a follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
And what was the total sales that number relates to?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, about $34 million in license sales each year.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Moniz, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, and Representative Guru, that $34 billion is only for successful license applicants, and there are quite a number of unsuccessful applicants that contribute to that credit card fee as well.
Follow up?
I have no more questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
And did you say a date? Did you specifically say a date that this was to begin? Season dates? I mean, I heard you say it would, X number were harvested, that it would end, but I didn't hear a start date.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, right now the proposed regulation has a September 15th, November 15th date.
Senator Moniz was first, and then you.
Thank you. Director Talbott, you mentioned prior to that it was like a $20 per application fee. So what was the total with the $20 application fee that you said it took to process the paperwork? which made you then choose to do it electronically. What is the difference in there?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I believe what the point I was trying to get at is that back in the days of the paper application, when we took checks in and did that, I think it was about $17, just less than $20 to process those transactions between the department and the state auditor's office. And currently, we do everything we can to get people to apply online and use credit cards rather than send us in those applications. The applications are much more correct, and it cuts down significantly on the amount of time and effort for us to enter those applications in. We used to hire about 30 Kelly temporaries that sat in our basement 24 hours a day and entered all that off those paper applications. And so transitioning to an electronic system has saved us a lot of overhead in entering that information.
I guess my question, yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question, you said it cost you a little in excess of $1.5 million credit card fees. What did it cost you to do the paperwork process? I'm assuming considerably more. Do you have any idea what that cost would be?
Director. Mr. Chairman, Senator, no, I don't have that cost now, but I think it was pretty significant. You're correct, because we hired a lot of people to enter that data and then the transaction. So it very conceivably could have been more than $1.5 million.
Senator Anselmi Dahl.
Chairman, thank you, and Director Talbott, thanks also for having Brian call me back so quickly when I sent my questions in on this subject. But I just wanted to make sure, I think I understood my conversation with him that there would be no limit on the applications, because then you have a time factor, and that application fee is taken in by Game and Fish, not refunded in any case, correct?
Director. Mr. Chairman, Senator, that's correct. We keep the application fee.
Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
So then would you also do the credit card fee if we said, hey, let's go ahead and do credit card fees on the $6,000, $600 amount and all the other ones? You do also on perhaps the application fee as well?
Director. Mr. Chairman, Senator, yeah, we would do the credit card fee on the licenses that we actually sell. We're not going to require everybody to buy a license to apply, so that will be fair to them.
Only on grizzly bears.
That's correct.
Right, but not the other species, because, for example, elk, you pay whether you get it or not.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other questions regarding that topic? All right, I have one more question for you, sort of issue, and that is antler hunting. The way I read this, I'm getting pushed from certain places to look at that again. The commission's authority to regulate the shed antler collection. And in fact, we actually heard about it at our first meeting in Grable a year ago, if you recall. And so it's sort of a timeless topic, and just to sort of flesh this out for the committee, the price of these antlers is up and going up, and they're highly sought after, and there is definitely a relationship between the stress that it places on the wintering wildlife while people are looking for the antlers and the wildlife. So anyway, getting back to it, when I read the statutes, it says in there that I believe that the commission has the authority to regulate the antler season between January 1st and May 1st. Did I read that right? And so if that's the case, then the commission could actually move, we don't regulate it. There is no season east of the divide. West of the divide, there is the continental divide. And so if the commission felt so obligated, it could move that season backwards, but not forwards. It could move it into May. Like, for example, if we had like last year, we had a really high snow year, a lot of loss of especially the mule deer fawns on the Big Piney front. And there was a lot of pressure to move that antler collecting season later into May or even June. The commission didn't have that authority. On the other hand, this year, that we've had a milder winter, and the commission could have made it start April 15th, for example. What say you?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and I guess I would just throw out that the antler issue has been a long time issue. And as you point out, Mr. Chairman, the legislature several years ago gave the commission the authority on the west side of the Continental Divide on public land, not on private land, to regulate the collection of antlers between January 1 and May 1. And so the commission has stuck with those dates. They have not changed those dates. And you're also correct in that last year there was significant public input that we should move that May 1st date back for the protection of primarily mule deer and elk on the west side of the Continental Divide, because that was, as you will recall, a very, very significant winter. The commission did not have the authority to go past the May 1st deadline. In addition to that, after that bill was passed by the legislature, concerns from individuals, primarily landowners on the east side of the Continental Divide, was such that antler hunting on private land became a pretty significant issue. There were many of those landowner groups that came forth to the legislature and asked for the legislature to change the provisions of 23.3.305, which is the trespass statute, to allow the Wyoming Game and Fish Department the authority to use game and fish trespass, which is different than criminal trespass, to prosecute individuals who are on private land collecting antlers. We did that 2 years ago. And you're also correct, Mr. Chairman, in that there is still considerable comments and interest from the public, particularly on the east side of the Continental Divide, now on public lands on the east side of the Continental Divide, to implement an antler season on there. We hear many, many comments about it. Obviously, you hear comments about it as well. And that would certainly be a legislative prerogative if an individual legislature or this committee wanted to grant the authority to the commission to regulate antler hunting on the east side of the Continental Divide.
And or committee, and I'm not asking for a bill draft, but just something to think about is whether or not we should put a price on those antlers. And there could be some potential revenue to the state or the department or whatever. Just a thought. That's all I had. Anything else? All right, I want to throw, thank you very much. We appreciate it. I'm going to take comments from the public. This is our last chance. We're about to wrap this meeting up. Just for the committee to know, there is a real concern with the weather as far as what we do this afternoon. And so actually we're not going to fly. Do we still want to go to Camp Guernsey? I think I'm just going to if you want to go, go. I'm not going to decide for you. So it's voluntary. We're going to go to Fort Laramie first, and then from there we'll see what happens. But that's what's going on with that.
Mr. Chairman, it would be helpful for the military departments to know if members are planning on going, so they know whether to expect us.
Committee, what's your pleasure? Go or don't go?
I'm gonna go.
You're gonna go. Anybody else want to go? Show of hands. Who wants to go? Throw your hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tell them a handful of people are going to come. Somewhere between 4 and 12. Thank you for that. Any members of the public want to speak on anything that we covered or didn't cover? Come on up, tell us your name, who you represent, and be brief and logical.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Derek Farmer. I'm with Wyoming Hunter and Angler Alliance. And I just wanted to tell you I appreciate the actions that the committee took today, and that I wanted to express support for the Game and Fish to have the authority to regulate the technology and methods used for hunting. My organization would support that. We also support the GPS coordinates. We feel that big game animals should be hunted by the person individually, and we should not have those available for sale to the general public, the GPS coordinates of those animals. So I'll look forward to seeing how this comes through the committee and working with you guys in the future. If you have any questions for me, I'll stand.
Any questions for Mr. Farmer? Thank you for coming, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the public, Mr. Floyd? You're good. Mr. Wharf? Young lady? Okay. Committee, the meeting's adjourned. Our schedule, I don't know. What's our schedule, Representative Steinmetz? This is your county.
Mr. Chairman, so we can head out to the gathering place now, and that is just right when you come into Fort Laramie. We'll travel through Fort Laramie to get here, everybody. So that's just west of 22